Eve of the Daleks is the last of the New Year's Day specials trilogy, Chibnall's Dalek trilogy, the 3 festive specials showrunner Chris Chibnall had as a sort of chaser to each of his Doctor Who series. This one was promoted as a festive rom-com. In Chibnall's own words, it's an intimate, standalone, time loop romantic comedy. We're going to have a great conversation about this romantic comedy. We've got some great voices to discuss this story. It's our first 5-person conversation since the last New Year's special, and I think we're all nice and ready to discuss the many elements of this new story, and wouldn't you know it, it's the eve of the penultimate story. So discussing Eve of the Daleks on this evening will be myself, Neo from Australia, joined as usual by Ingiga from England, and also Miriz from the USA, Oliver from England, and welcoming back Astra from Scotland, whose last appearance on the channel was the last New Year's special discussion. Happy New Year, everyone, as well. That seems timely for now.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And I just want to say, from all Thasmins, I'd like to say you're welcome.
Indeed. Well, on that note, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to Yaz and the Doctor, Thasmin, representation, all those elements. We have plenty to say there. I know I sure do. So I say we build up to it by discussing all the other parts of the story we want to talk about first. The time loop and other interesting temporal points of the story, how the episode was crafted as a romantic comedy, and how audience members may have received it in turn. The interesting characterization of the guest stars, the overarching intentionality of this era, the direction of the story and interesting production elements, and those are just the things I have in mind. I'm sure my 4 friends here have their own fascinating things to talk about too. So let's start how we usually do for this era by going around and asking everyone what were things we liked about the story first. Astra, why don't you start us off? What was something or some things you liked about Eve of the Daleks?
Well, that's a big question.
It is.
There wasn't, if I'm brutally honest, there wasn't much in the sense that I can deliberately pick out something I actively enjoyed.
Wow.
That said, which is
that's pretty brutal way to start, okay. I have to say.
Okay. Let me clarify. Okay, so there was actually one thing I actively saw as a standout moment in the episode that I did actually enjoy, and it was the Thasmin scene, specifically between the discussion between Dan and Yaz.
Yes.
I thought that was one of the first times I genuinely felt anything in a Chibnall episode.
I was cheering.
Yeah, it was. I mean, first, it was well acted. I thought that there was good performances from both of them in that scene, and the dialogue was good. I thought it was genuinely sort of heartfelt.
Yeah.
And also, I was pleasantly surprised that Chibnall decided to go there. I'm not saying it was, there's some sort of, put a wee asterisk next to that, because I'm sure there's plenty to say about that later. However, I thought overall it was a positive thing. It made me happy. I enjoyed it greatly, and also I've got to say, some of the performances of the guest stars were also quite enjoyable.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Maybe not always intentionally in the way that Chibnall intended it, but I still thought that was quite interesting. I obviously liked the premise of the episode, even if it sort of fell flat sometimes. But yeah, there you go.
Oliver, anything you liked about Eve of the Daleks?
Yeah, I mean, on top of those things, specifically Aisling B's performance is great. It's really good. She carries so much crap dialogue. It's fantastic. The main thing was that I was genuinely quite impressed with the idea of sort of taking a minute off each loop. It's a simple change that makes the time loop story fit Doctor Who. It makes it fit the sort of 50-minute format. It's tense. It works as an idea. It doesn't hold together. It ends up falling apart. But as a way of doing a time loop for Doctor Who, I think that was pretty good.
Yep. Is that it?
No pressure.
No pressure. Pretty much. I liked all the Yaz stuff again, but sort of too little too late, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've some issues with how the time loop happened, but I agree. There was a good suspense tool, the taking a minute off. Mira's, what did you like?
Look, I was going to try and justify this and come up with a whole explanation, but I'm with Astra. The only good part was the Thasmin stuff. Well, let me rephrase. The best part was the Thasmin stuff. Shockingly so. Like, disruptively so. Because it's very easy after the last few months to assume that there's literally nobody in charge over there. So to watch baseline competent television for New Year's Eve was a lovely treat.
It's interesting you say the term baseline competence, because I was re-listening to our Revolution of the Daleks podcast today. So at one point, Astra was laughing at me quite cruelly, if I might add, because I was heaping some praise on a scene within Revolution of the Daleks, which in our Flux discussions, Gig and I know we were talking about was additional shooting. It wasn't part of the episode as initially planned. It later went back and got shot there. The beanie scene in the TARDIS, which is the most character-based scene of that story, perhaps, where Ryan is kind of simmering with the Doctor, and we get some actual characterization beats coming off the Timeless Children. It's crazy that wasn't initially filmed for the episode. Anyway, Astra was laughing at me because I was effusing about how having two characters interact in a way that built off their histories and actually was bouncing off their individual viewpoints was really cool for this era, to have two characters communicate like that. And the term baseline competence, I'm pretty sure, came up. So it's really interesting. We got some circularity with the New Year's specials there. I say we shift to an upbeat mode now and ask Gig what did he like about the episode.
Well, besides the obvious part of Chibnall finally deciding to give these three lead characters a kind of interpersonal dynamic that emerges towards the end, I would say, generally, I liked that for this story, Chibnall set his aims as low as he could possibly go, because we've had so much of Chibnall just trying to write everything and anything, the kitchen sink, global universe-spanning garbage, massive ideas that he just abandons or disrespects horrifically. So for him to just deliberately tone it down and write an episode set in a boring warehouse with just a couple of people running around and the Dalek chasing them and nothing else of particular importance happening, I felt it was a refreshing change of pace. And besides that, yeah, what everyone else said, Aisling B, Thasmin, yeah, that's it.
My turn. What did I like about Eve of the Daleks? I liked getting a fresh new voice for the show. The director, who Chibnall said didn't even have an agent when he approached her to do this story. It was her first hour of broadcast television, and finding her was part of Chibnall and his script editor's drive to, in their words, talent spot emerging directors from their own short films. I really like that.
So he's like predatorily poaching young directors before they have proper representation. That's really good, actually. That's very BBC. I think he's got a big future in the Controller. If they still do that over there.
I condemn this kind of cynicism coming from mirrors at this point. I like this. It's probably my favourite aspect of the Chibnall era, is lifting up rising creatives and then them going off to do their own things with that great experience. This director is called Annetta Laufer, by the way. So much of Doctor Who, I think, is a insular world. I mean, look who the next showrunner is. We're going in circles here.
Yeah.
Where, like, the same people will control aspects of the franchise. Sometimes the very same people since the 90s or the early 2000s will still be in a similar position somewhere in the franchise. Maybe not in the TV area, but in other areas. So I love seeing this more directional path where people come up through the show, they impart their touch on the show, and then they go off with that experience to go do their own things, like I hope like Vinay Patel is going to do next. I think that's really good. It's good to see people come up and go through like that. I think it's a good thing Doctor Who, which is such a institutional behemoth, I think it's a good thing it can do is lift people up and give them experience, and they can go do their own stuff after that. So I think it's really cool they took a director from short films to do this story.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that it's ethically good, and it's a cool thing that the era's been doing. It's part of Chibnall's genuinely very good behind the camera efforts. But it's also one of those things where I can't help feel that despite, and also maybe because of the up and coming new directors that they're using, everything looks very similar. I don't feel like individual episodes, even when directed by people who have never worked on TV before, feel like every other episode in this era. I didn't get a sense of original direction here at all.
Is it like an MCU effect, would you say? Like that sort of homogenizing influence?
Yeah. It doesn't help that it's all set inside in a storage container and it's the same Daleks and it's the same costumes and whatnot, but still.
That's part of the double-edged sword, I guess, of rising up fresh creatives, is that the house style they'll often have to, or they will kind of accommodate to, because if it's their first time doing something like this, obviously you're going to want to fit in with what's being done. And also TV as a medium tends to go off, the pilot director of a show or an era, in this case's style. It's like the early episodes of Series 11 imparted so much of the visual language used to this day. Well, it's often the very same directors that are still doing the show now. Like the extreme close-ups.
Reusing the same shots.
Yeah, using the same shots. So yeah, there is that kind of joint thing of it's great to raise up new directors. Sometimes it's hard to see their own, great creativity through, Doctor Who or the MCU or whatever, because they will be accommodating to that house style. But hopefully, this being on their CV lets them go off and do things where they can express their own style more.
I would like to know how much the director let the cast improvise, because it seemed...
I have quotes on it.
Oh.
Ah.
Excellent.
All I was going to say is that it's kind of slightly relevant to the improvisation thing, which is that we heard from the director that when she was brought on, the script wasn't even finished. So she said it was a collaborative process is what it became. And yeah, obviously that comports with some rumours we've heard about Chibnall's efficacy with finishing scripts. But like, again, that whole the whole thing of the director not being able to put that much of their own stamp on it, I think when you don't have the time and you don't have time to rehearse or plan stuff to the extent that maybe you would, I think it's inevitable that you don't quite get that much. I think it's inevitable that things just get that baseline rather than really show any individual flair. See what I mean?
What's great is my other positive point to say about the special ties in with the quotes. I don't have to go off course. This all moves together wonderfully. Firstly, just to back up Gig, the improvisation thing he's talking about, so in the December Doctor Who magazine 572, Annetta, the director, says, well, the magazine reads, Annetta also had a surprising, to her at least, amount of input into the story. When I came on board, I was expecting to just be handed a script and to get on with making it. But Chris was still writing it. So it ended up being much more of a collaborative process, which was another thing that was really exciting for me.
It can be really disruptive when you can't, just when you're brought on board a project and you can't just make it, really. That can be upsetting. Interesting
phrase choice there. The next paragraph here is, when Annetta joined the show... How do you pronounce the actress's name for Sarah?
Aisling B. It's like an Irish name. I googled it. It's Aisling, yeah.
Okay.
Aisling.
When Annetta joined the show, Aisling B was already attached to the episode. Chris cast Aisling, and she's brilliant in it, Annetta says. She's very funny. She has a very different energy to Jodie. She improvises a lot. And what I really liked about this character, Sarah, was her dialogue felt so naturalistic to me, particularly for this era. I was like, wow, this is not bad dialogue a lot of the time. This feels real to me. This is funny to me. She's using actual terms that someone in Ireland would actually be using, which was interesting to me because I know Ascension of the Cybermen's depiction of Ireland was something, some of our Irish friends took issue with. It was very kind of stereotypical. Very much an English view of Ireland, you might say. But here, she feels like an Irish person. She's saying the things you would expect someone like that to be saying. She's funny, she's witty, she's fast.
It's really the benefit you do get from cast improvisation, from line-orama, stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought she did a great job. Yeah, those were the two main things I liked.
I mean, that's the thing. Chibnall's dialogue is often so, workmanlike and just, clunking around. So to have an actor who can just insert ad-libs and be very kind of fast-paced and jumping from here to there, it just feels completely different. You can feel which lines are something that Chibnall would never have put on paper, almost.
Yeah, the improv stuff, I think, ties in with the whole time loop thing, because the episodes... really very static, and it repeats the same beats again and again. Stuff like the phone call with the mum. That ends up being a structure that you can improv around, right? When you're shooting the same scene again and again because you're doing the same scene again and again because it's a time loop, that's quite an interesting bit of framework in which you can do some good comedy. And I think the time loop really helps with the comedy, to be honest.
On that note of the time loop and comedy and that gag about the phone lines being busy, at midnight, New Year's, I'm not so prescriptivist with comedy to be like, everything needs to always work in rules of threes. You need to have 2 joke beats and then the third one that does the payoff. But how many times in this episode did we get that the phone lines won't be busy at New Year's midnight? And how many times did we get the Daleks do not do normal thing? I felt like this was so far beyond 3. This was like 9 or 10 times these joke beats just kept going on and on and on. And I was feeling hypnotized or something. Like, this wasn't just not funny to me. It was like, I felt like I was in the time loop myself, just getting these things inanely repeated over and over and over. It was overwhelming to me.
Earlier I said line-o-rama, and I really do wonder how much that's the case. That's the thing you get in a lot of American cinematic comedies from the past few years, where it's just they let the cast improvise for a few minutes on set, and then they just cut that together into a scene. It's
why so many Western comedy movies look so shit in terms of the lighting, because everything has to be so flatly lit. They can't do any blocking because they're just relying on the actors to improvise. And the actors are good at it. You know, they'll come up with funny stuff.
It's also why so much dialogue is, very naturalistic and sounds perfect when it's, just one line, but then it just runs together and together and together.
Makes them all look the same.
And I think that might be the case here, is that there's just, it feels like it didn't get edited down from, how long was this? 60 minutes? 50 minutes?
Yeah, 58.
58. It feels like this could have been edited down to, maybe not 45, but...
I think 45 quite easily.
Yeah.
That point about the jokes repeating and how sometimes painful it was to have the same sort of thing retread constantly, and there was no sort of innovation on it, if that makes sense. It was just the same joke over and over. But it almost just reminded me when you were saying it, so the trailer for this episode was actually uploaded to YouTube as an 8-minute long trailer, but in reality it was a very short, was it like 30 seconds or something, but it was repeated for 8 minutes. And so within that trailer, if you've not seen this version of it online, the trailer itself, the shortened version, and I'm just giving an estimate of 30 seconds, I didn't actually time it, but the sort of original 30-second trailer has this sort of time loop idea in it, as in it repeats, so it sort of resets and repeats and essentially functions like the episode, which I thought was quite an interesting sort of editing choice. I quite liked it because it gets across the idea of a time loop. However, they then took that footage of this constant repeat and dragged it out for 8 minutes, and there was, at one point, there was some brief new footage later on in the video, and I only knew this because Neil went through the entire thing and found it.
Of course I did.
And not everyone is like Neil. So,
is that a compliment, is it?
It's a compliment. I'm taking it as a compliment.
No, it's absolutely a compliment. It's absolutely a compliment. But the issue there is I got tired of watching it the moment I realised that it was just the same thing over and over. I'd imagine a lot of people, a lot of casual viewers, if they even were following the YouTube account in the first place, which obviously not, I'm not saying that a lot of them would be.
I thought they all remember to subscribe and follow the...
Yeah, absolutely. They always get that reminder. But so all the casual viewers, you're going to see an 8-minute trailer and be like, oh, that's interesting, an 8-minute trailer. What sort of new exciting footages are going to be in this?
That's how I felt.
There wasn't any. Yeah, there wasn't any. It was just the same short sort of thing repeated, and it was tiring to watch, and I was like, this is just pointless. That's what it felt like in the episode to me, when these jokes were just being repeated and they were never being innovated on. There was never any punchline. It was just the same joke over and over and over, and I was like, this is just so short-sighted. This is not a way to get people engaged with the content. It's just the same thing.
It works on some of us.
Yeah, it works on some of us.
That's why they call it the rule of as many as you can get away with, right? That's what it says in the comedy rule book. Yeah. That being said, the punchline on Daleks do not have friends, that should have just been the last one, the third one, because that's a perfect finale to that joke.
Yeah, it's the funniest sort of iteration of it.
I didn't even notice the Dalek lines. I realised watching this that I've been tuning out all Dalek dialogue for like 10 years now. I just don't hear it anymore.
That's fair.
My main thing this week is going to be the logic of the time loop. because I love time loop stories. I'm a sucker for them. But I think it's interesting what you mentioned there about the trailer. In the trailer uses the classic time loop song abruptly starting at the beginning of a loop to signify it, which is much more effective and stylistic than anything in the actual episode, where you don't have that kind of moment of reset that makes it super clear that we're starting again. You know, Groundhog Day is the classic one, but Palm Springs has one. Most things do. You don't have that kind of abrupt, oh, we're starting the loop again moment. And I guess part of that's because of the
Heaven Sent did.
The shifting minute, but yeah, it's a bit weird.
Oh, hey! She finally got hers Heaven Sent.
I guess.
The thing that annoyed me with the loop wasn't the mechanics. What annoyed me with it was it the most dramatically interesting choice to have every character work out they're in a loop within like the first 10 minutes. All of them realize they're in a time loop, and then the majority of the episode was them all knowing this. Wouldn't it have been a little bit more exciting if it was like one character realized, then two realized, or if only one realized and like the focus of the episode was just on them?
That would be horrible. Because we've seen that movie a dozen times. It would be funny if only one... I guess which character it would be if only one character noticed. So
yes.
There would be no real point to it. Yes, exactly. Because she's got her keen police mind. I was fun.
This could it could work so well with Yaz, because she could like try out different things. We're not getting to the Thasmin stuff quite yet, but what if she like...
That would have been good, actually.
Yeah, like if she said something to the doctor and saw how it worked or how it didn't work, and then the loop reset and she tried it a different way or something. A Yaz character-centric episode, it could have been amazing.
Yeah, see, I think this idea would have really effectively got across what Chibnall intended with this episode. So he claimed it was a romantic comedy. So first of all, the romance, okay, the romance side of things, I was never convinced by it with the Sarah and Nick stuff. That was more like a horror.
Yeah.
But I could see it in the sort of Yaz and Doctor stuff, or I suppose it was a little bit one-sided with the Yaz things so far. But so you've got the romance aspect there, but it wasn't really brought to the forefront because of, like I said, the Sarah and Nick stuff was never handled well, I don't think. So if you'd had a Yaz-centric episode that put the Thasmin to the forefront, you could have gotten that romance sort of aspect easily. But you've also got the good potential for comedy, because if you've only got one character, or even two characters maybe, aware that they're in a time loop, obviously that could be something that could be presented as something scary, but it's also something that could be presented as something very comedic. Can you imagine that sort of Yaz, the dialogue you could potentially come up with, Yaz trying to convince, for example, Dan that they're repeating? Like, there's a lot of good jokes you could sort of pick up off that. So we did get a glance into sort of what a really good Yaz-centric episode could have been, because actually the sort of Yaz and Dan dynamic and the sort of heartfelt scene they did have was so good.
Yeah.
Now, if you just brought that to the forefront for it and made that the focus, perfect. I think you could have had a really, really good episode on a character front there, instead of making Nick and his serial killer tendencies be the focus.
I don't know about like all the Nicks out there in the audience. I don't know how many there are, but I feel like the way to self-insert into the episode, the way to relate to the episode so much more, wouldn't have been being tied up on your exes whose items you collect and you put in expensive self-storage units. But I think what would have been more relatable is like, I feel like this is a common fantasy. Guys, tell me this is common and it's not just me. That in certain life situations, you might imagine, I wish this was like a video game and I could quick save right now to what I'm about to say. So if I screw up saying this thing, which is really important for me to tell someone or try, I can go back and reload and try it again. I'm sure we've had, situations in life where I wish I had a chance to redo that, or before we actually do it, I wish, I didn't just have to do this once. I had multiple chances to do this or something. I can't do a first impression twice on someone, but I wish I could. I think it would have been so cool to have an episode play like that with Yaz, or with anyone really, for that to be the fantasy of the episode. Yeah. To be, if you could like quick save.
And also felt like, if this turns out really badly, I'm just gonna kill myself right away.
Could have been darkly funny, yeah.
I mean, there was already a show about that, Russian Doll, on Netflix a while ago. That's basically that premise.
That's true. I had one of those moments where I mispronounced Aisling B's name at the top of this podcast. I think a version of this episode, well, because the classic time loop thing is only one person's aware.
Yeah.
A really interesting version might have been the Doctor's the only person who isn't aware. She's somehow excluded from it because she's the target.
Because it's her TARDIS.
Yeah. So all the humans are put in a position of power, and then you've switched up the dynamic. That's how it runs this week. Yaz realizes she can say whatever she likes to her. She's going to get reset. That'd be interesting, because then they have to take command and they have to do stuff themselves.
That would be way better.
The person they would normally rely on is essentially completely useless, and so I agree.
With exactly what Oliver and Astra is saying there, I feel like I'm in a time loop, because when I listened to our Revolution of the Daleks podcast today, we were having this same conversation about wishing the Doctor had actually been decentered in the episode like we thought the premise would set up, and then we could get more focus on Yaz's characterization, who seemed like she had the most interesting characterization of the episode. We were saying the same stuff about the episode should have decentered the Doctor, and it felt like it would have, and then it didn't, and it was, Doctor time anyway.
We've said the same thing about a lot of episodes this past... I mean, Rosa comes to mind.
It's these three specials have so many time loop elements to them, because the same setup of... It's meant to be like a rom-com kind of thing with the two guys, except I think one of the guys is creepier than I think the episode wants us to read them as. It's all... These three episodes feel like a time loop in so many ways. It's interesting.
My review of the last one, the last Revolution, was that...
Yeah.
It wasn't even bad. It was fine, like last New Year's and the New Year's before, and bets are open for 2022. And I didn't expect that to be literalized in an episode that sets time looping again and again and again, just the same thing happening.
Just one more thing about the idea of a time loop rom-comedy, because in the episode there's like maybe a nugget of something that could have been more of a full premise, which is the idea of being stuck doing the same thing over and over, blah, 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 and not being able to break the loop by, i.e. confessing your love or whatever. So we see Nick, who's been creeping on Sarah and not actually coming out and saying that he likes her. And then you also have, of course, Yaz, who can't admit to the Doctor her own feelings. And if an actual rom-com writer or an actual time travel interested writer or whatever was writing this, then I think a natural place could go would be that in order to break the loop, they have to, confess their feelings, basically, something like that. So they have to break the loop in their own lives in order to break the time loop, because that's the way of dovetailing those two things. And obviously we don't get anything even remotely like that. We come to the end of the episode and
I just wish that we had somebody on Doctor who was like a rom-com writer and a writer who liked time loops and time travel.
Yeah,
it's just a shame. If only. I mean, HBO keeps snatching up all the good ones I hear.
So it's a missed opportunity there. It's a missed opportunity because it's like it could have been such a strong character-focused episode. All the elements were there. It was ready for it, and then Chibnall, for some reason, chose to focus more on the sci-fi aspect that he didn't even get right. So instead of having this potential for this really, really great character moment, just as said, the idea that the characters actually have to go through some sort of development in order to solve the plot, instead the plot just sort of continues. The development is just sort of tacked on at the side, and then ultimately to solve things they just have to get out of the building before midnight, and that's just it's so dull compared to what it could have been. And I think that's one of the biggest things with Chibnall's era in general, just the missed opportunities. You have the elements there that could have been something good, and he just passes them by.
Mm-hmm.
The absolutely classic time loop resolution is, the person learns a lesson and then they're free from purgatory.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's how Groundhog Day works. That's how they all work. It's so interesting that he specifically chose for it not to be that. And Doctor Who always has love as the solution episode resolutions. And so here it's weird that it's not at.
Yeah.
It's specifically a complicated sci-fi, oh, well, the force field only surrounds this part of the building, so if we get to this part, then it's fine. Like, why not just have it be a big kiss at midnight, and that solves it?
Yeah. Perfect.
It's something that the franchise has plenty of practice at. Explain, why the kiss would work, and then that's it. Probably how the TV movie should have ended too, come to think of it.
I hate being the plot should have done this guy, but something that confused... So I normally don't get these kind of reactions with episodes, but I got one here. So the whole... well, first of all, it's weird there were so many explosives in the building. I feel like we needed to know a bit more about Jeff for that to feel like baked in. Anyway, not a huge deal.
Is he a terrorist or something?
We don't see.
I was certain that he was going to be involved in the plot somehow. Why does he have all that stuff upstairs?
I assumed the guy at the end was Jeff, but then turns out it's some guy from...
That was Karl. I was so happy to see Karl again.
Yeah, no, it was Karl. I didn't recognise him, so I was like, is this Jeff? In fact, I'm actually quite shocked it wasn't Jeff, because
Me too.
what relevance did Karl have? You've got this guy who's mentioned throughout the whole episode. You never see him.
It's for us guys who rewatch The Woman Who Fell to Earth all the time to feel validated and listened to by Chibnall, because it raises my hopes. This is why I was cheering when I saw Karl and immediately knew that was Karl, because it raises the hopes and the possibility that Tim Shaw will return in whatever form, which has been what I've been hanging on to since 2018, that we haven't seen the last of him.
Maybe reintroducing Karl was specifically because Tim Shaw's going to come back in the final episode, and so he was just
Exactly.
Oh, that'd be so exciting. Anyway, I wish.
Anyway, this is a tangent. I was not trying to talk about the explosives so much. What I was trying to say is the whole, like, I get the kind of narrative idea with, Sarah has to talk to her mum and mum has to phone call whatever relationship mum calls that resolves the plot. I get all that, but don't all these characters have phones? Like, why couldn't Dan put his phone on the explosives and Yaz call Dan? They're friends. They've been friends for years now. Like, why did it have to be Sarah's phone?
Because then it wouldn't pay off the joke.
Yeah.
Then it wouldn't
The
be
very
a
long-running
classic
joke.
20-beat joke.
Just another point of thematic uncorrelation, I guess, when it comes to actually explosives as well, is that and rom-com stuff, because we talked about Nick and how Nick has these Nick has all these things from his exes, which you could say are, I guess it's implied that maybe they're tying him down somehow because they get blown up and he's like, oh yeah, blew up my stuff, ex-terminated or whatever. And like, on one hand, if this was maybe a different story by a different writer, then maybe destroying all this stuff he's hanging on to would be a way of freeing him, as a character, getting character development. But the thing is, we also learn that the reason he's actually coming to this storage facility is it's just an excuse to see Sarah. So like, it kind of becomes redundant. Like, so blowing up the stuff from his exes doesn't actually like connect. It doesn't actually achieve growth for him. It's just something that looks like it would in another story, but it doesn't in this one.
Is he actually tied down by his old relationships? Like, that's not part of his character.
I feel like there's two different characters that were merged together really unfortunately with Nick, because the end result is such a serial killer. I mean, he's literally introduced, when we see his storage room, it's exactly like that scene in a zillion horror movies. I would go with Wrong Turn, where they, go around the back of the house and they discover hundreds and hundreds of pairs of shoes and sunglasses and cell phones and everything just lying around next to zillion
trophies.
Yeah, but I think there's a very, Happy New Year, let's have dinner sort of thing going on between him and Sarah that just... Why couldn't they have focused on that instead of the creepy stuff?
The X thing was something that was completely useless. It added nothing to his character and nothing to the story. In fact, I believe it detracted from his character. It made him look creepy. So, and obsessive. And you already get, when you first introduced to Nick, you already get that sort of feeling from him, because when he is speaking to Sarah at the front desk, she is clearly uncomfortable and doesn't want to speak to him, and he persists. So that was already putting me on the back foot with him. I didn't enjoy that. I didn't think that was a very nice dynamic, especially because I was well aware that Chibnall was always going to get these two together towards the end because he'd advertised it as a romantic comedy. So he was not respecting her boundaries. So I was like, hey, this does not feel good, but at least maybe he'll redeem himself. And then it just gets worse and worse when you find out that not only is he sort of this sort of pushy and doesn't sort of respect that Sarah doesn't want to speak to him, you find out that he is keeping all these belongings neatly laid out on shelves, a lot of belongings, and all of them tagged and dates and names of his ex's stuff. So then it doubles down on this idea that he doesn't respect women's boundaries, which I don't think was intentional, but my god, it was so uncomfortable to watch. But all I could think about was that it was completely useless. It did not contribute in any way, and they could have easily, Chibnall could have made this a lot more innocent and a lot more sort of, you know, I'm not saying it would have been absolutely perfect, but certainly if he just made it, for example, Nick every single year appears with a completely random item, just something pointless, like useless,
picked up off the ground outside, practically.
Something that made no sense to stick, you know, pay all this money to stick in, you know, storage. But he shows up, and maybe the gag could have been Sarah being confused, like, why does this guy keep turning up with this, like, you know, pointless stuff? And then instead of it going like that, oh, these are my ex's belongings, it could have just been he maybe maybe Sarah that questions him, okay, why are you bringing all this random stuff in? And he sort of
just to come see you.
And maybe initially he sort of, you know, refuses to say because he's embarrassed and shy, and then eventually it comes out that he just wanted to come see her, so he's been bringing all this random, you know, stuff to the storage facility. Then it would have been more sort of almost, I mean, it'd still be a bit strange, but a bit more charming and a bit more sort of innocent, instead of this subplot almost of his exes and his creepy behaviour towards them. So I don't know what that was.
The thing is, if you didn't want him to come across as a creep at all, I don't know why you'd give him the dialogue that is, when Sarah says that is so stalkery, he says, I prefer unrequited or shy. Stalkery would be if I was menacing you or said anything about this at all, which I haven't. That's so specific in a way I don't think a non-stalker would be saying.
It's Dennis Reynolds shit, you know, he knows the exact contours of what a stalker would be.
It's the Romeo and Juliet clause.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of other writers I think could have gotten away with this idea of like an edgy, sort of cracked and weird and fucked up black comedy romance, you know, where she falls in love with her weird stalker serial killer guy, but Chris Chibnall doing it for New Year's Eve just wasn't going to work.
To paraphrase a blog I recently read about Resolution from a few years ago, at the end of this story, Sarah's just traded one scenario of being repetitively stalked by an unrelenting psycho predator for another one.
Great blogger.
It is once again Chibnall's it's once again Chibnall's problem that he writes something that doesn't feel good, that there's something wrong with it, but he doesn't seem to be aware that it's a problem. And it's something we saw, for example, one of the episodes that really sticks in my mind about this is Arachnids in the UK. That episode where the culmination of it was something quite uncomfortable, that it just came across as wrong, but he just wasn't aware of it. Same with the doctor's conversation.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me as well? Also the doctor's conversation with Graham. That's his name, isn't it? With Graham. His conversation.
The older Dan.
The older Dan. That guy. No, Graham. But the doctor's conversation with Graham, where she sort of brushes off his concerns about when he brings up, you know, his worries about cancer. But the issue with this as well, it is once again something that happens in the episode that is uncomfortable to watch, that doesn't come across good, but Chibnall is just completely oblivious to this overtone, and this is just what you saw. Again, it's this repetition of the same problem where Nick does and says something in this episode that is just creepy, and Chibnall does not seem aware that there is this even, I mean, to be fair, I don't see how he could have seen this as a good thing, but he just doesn't seem to be aware I say that Sarah actually called out the fact that it was creepy, that it was weird.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So this is what was really, yeah.
So there should have been a response to it.
Yeah, this is what confused me. She called it out,
Yeah.
and I was actually relieved that she called it out, because I was like, oh, thank God, there is someone aware in the story that there's something wrong with this.
Maybe it was improv.
Yes, who knows? But then Sarah was actively
Yeah.
criticised by the other characters for pointing out that there's something uncomfortable with this. Not just actively criticised, she was berated for it. She was treated as if she was being awful.
As if she'd killed him.
Yeah, it's... I just don't understand. I'm so confused.
Building off a lot of the stuff Astra's been saying, what bothered me particularly about this whole Nick Sarah stuff is I think something kind of insidious with how creepy relationships like this often get written. And it was that, so Nick dies heroically, well, he doesn't save them, they all die afterwards. Nick dies would-be heroically, and Sarah's like, no one's ever died for me before, and then there's kind of this air of entitlement, like, Nick has died for me.
Yeah.
I've got this nerdy, dorky guy has died for me. He's done something for me that I didn't ask him to do, but he's done something for me. So I love him now, or I owe him love now. This is a beat.
It's very much owed, isn't it? It's not achieved or realized.
Yeah, I see this in a lot of stories, in a lot of romances where I don't think it's intended as creepy, and it creeps me out because I've seen this in real life a lot. This kind of thing where a person, might they kind of get this air of entitlement to a relationship or something because they do something that the other person hasn't asked them to do, but they do it anyway. And then it's like, well, now because I did this thing, you didn't ask me to do it, but I think it's chivalrous and I think it's heroic and I did it. Therefore, relationship is on the cards now. And I got that whole vibe with that because Sarah is written kind of unreservedly as, wow, no one's ever done that for me before. Got zapped by a robot. I have to reevaluate this dorky man. He's not quite so dorky anymore. I think he's quite, great now. He's a good-hearted weirdo. I want to be in a relationship with him. I want to go travel the world with him. That creeped me out. Do you guys know this kind of beat I'm talking about? This entitlement thing? I really don't like it.
Yeah.
It was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What's worse is that he's like sulking when he does it. She says to him, that's kind of weird. And I was like, oh, that's a bit harsh. And he's just like, okay, I'm going to go die now. And he walks out of the room. The doctor chases him like, what are you doing? Come back. And you'll just watch him walk out in front of the Daleks like, kill me now, bye.
And it didn't achieve anything. No one asked him to do it, and it didn't achieve a single thing. But because he was such a good guy that he did it, it's like now he's the romantic prospect.
Yeah, but not for a second do I feel like that was intentional on his part. I feel that was pretty transparently, the worst thing that could possibly happen to me just did. I'm going to step out into the hall and get exterminated.
Oh, yeah. I'm not reading. I don't think he was intentionally thinking, I'm going to game this time loop and get the woman of my dreams by dying to Dalek, whatever. I don't think he was doing that.
Now, Moffat would have done that, and it would have been genius.
Yeah. But the way the episode works is Sarah starts liking him after he does it, which is my issue. I don't like this kind of romance where it's like a guy does something chivalrous that he wasn't asked to, and now he gets the girl. I really don't like that.
Well, again, that's the time loop thing. Someone uses the time loop and the knowledge that they're gaining to manipulate a relationship out of someone, and that's always specifically not the right thing to do. They try doing that and then and then they have to form an actual consensual relationship, and that's the solution in the end. But this episode ends on the note. The message of this episode that the Doctor explains at length is that if you keep trying, it'll all work out the way you want it. Just keep trying.
And just on the note of him getting shot by the Dalek and willfully exterminated, keeping in mind that we know that from the time loop that he's going to come back after he gets shot, and nowhere in this episode, anywhere, do they put any focus on the, suffering of being shot by a Dalek. Because, in past episodes, it's been set up as this thing that's excruciatingly painful, right? The most painful possible way to die. They don't address that at all. Everyone just brushes off being exterminated like it's nothing. So you can't really put any investment in the idea that he's doing anything particularly chivalrous or heroic or epic in any way by getting zonked by these Daleks, because there's really nothing to support that. Because he's just going to come straight back and everything's going to be like nothing happened.
Yeah, it undermines the horror of being killed by a Dalek in the first place. It just means it makes it seem like it's not that it's not that bad of a thing. I mean, aside from the fact you're going to end up dead by the end of it, but the actual sort of scary part, it's like this horrific death. Yeah, but it's not just death. It's like it's a horrific death. So, but this episode, the fact that even though they remember how it feels, presumably to die to a Dalek, they just don't care. They don't act like it's a big deal. So I guess Daleks give you a painless death, apparently, because that's, I don't know, it's just strange.
They
strange.
now share knowledge that only Jack Harkness in the universe shares.
Yeah.
And apparently it did nothing for them.
Yeah, it didn't affect them at all. They weren't bothered by it.
On the other hand, I could see that's the real reason why Sarah and Nick get together in the end, is because, who else are you going to hang out with after that? Jack doesn't come around anymore. He's not allowed here anymore.
No, he doesn't. It's funny, he didn't die at all in his Dalek episode, and then this one, everyone else died all the time. Funny how that works. There's a, returning to this Nick creepy point a bit, and we were talking about Jeff a bit earlier. Our friend Tome Def was saying the other day that his headcanon was the Jeff mentioned in the episode was either Jeff who likes porn from the 11th Hour, if you guys remember that Moffat gag.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or Jeff from Coupling, which I thought was interesting because when we were talking about attachment to exes and getting rid of stuff, that's a marker of your exes, or, the righteous destruction of stuff to do with the exes, I was thinking of the Patrick's closet of love in Coupling, and how I would like a Dalek to destroy that.
Here's what Tome doesn't know, is they're actually all regenerations of the same Jeff.
Well, there's even another Jeff at the end of Coupling, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what Jeff alluded to in A Christmas Carol, also known as Santa Claus, so that could be him too.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to acknowledge the fact they blew up Jeff's house. Like, Jeff was living in that storage unit and they blew up the place. Like, so if they'd shown Jeff at the end, it would have been quite sad because that's his home. He could have been in there. He could have died.
It should have ended by revealing that he actually was in the building the whole time and had no idea.
Oh dear.
We just find his charred corpse at the end after everything.
No, like the last shot before it explodes is he's in some, storage bin somewhere with a TV and a bed, and he's, popping champagne.
I just realised a connection that could have happened. What if instead of the name Jeff, the name was Karl? And then Karl seeing it at the end was the connection.
I thought for
Karl,
sure.
he would have a different reaction. But then that could be like the why Karl comes back is because it's another random guy's name, one syllable name we could have used, and then that thing could have hooked in.
And it's a character who it would be amusing to see his life destroyed again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that Karl's still a sad sack. He's not developed. He didn't learn anything from when he fell to earth. No, I just think it's odd that once again, it doesn't really matter. It's just small details, but nothing about the storage facility feels like a real world thing. The fact that they only have one customer and
every room is filled with one thing.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, I guess, but it feels like it's written by someone who doesn't know how the world works.
I don't know how they are in Manchester, but in Australia, they're not cheap, these places. Like, a guy using it just for weird X trophies is even more strange than I think the episode is, saying, because that's money. That's real money going towards that bizarre impulse.
It's like a closed world that only exists for the story.
It's amaterial.
Like, if Sherman had written it, maybe that would make sense. The idea of, a thing that only exists for the sake of these narrative purposes, but maybe not.
Isn't that funny? We were just talking about a time loop at Christmas. Yeah, there you go.
On a separate point, Chibnall seems to love inventing guys with weird habits like this. So you have Nick, you have Karl, you have Jeff alluded to in this episode too. It's just, I guess maybe Mitch in Resolution as well. He just seems to rather than write stories with, I guess, themes or development in them, whatever, he just seems to invent a guy with some weird habit to him and just plop them in the story, and that's brilliant characterization by Chib standards.
Well, that's because he doesn't have a Twitter, so
yeah,
he doesn't know making up a guy. This is slightly shifting into another realm of discussion, but interesting, and people have talked about this, but interesting, I think, that 13 now has a codified character flaw. She has her thing, a flaw that the episode knows is a flaw, I think.
It's a reasonable amount of time for her to start developing, character traits.
Yeah. Well, I generally think characters should do that with 2 episodes left.
Do you remember they brought up the Dalek slaughter, I guess, from the end of Flux? And it kind of... The debate she has with the Dalek there, where she's like, oh, it's just hijacking the Sontaran's plans. It reminded me of, actual fan arguments that have happened since that episode. It was weird.
I didn't pull the trigger, though. It wasn't actually me.
It wasn't my plan initially. It was someone else's plan. That's incredible defense. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that on the whole, in general, the logic of not necessarily not even the time loop logic itself, but just how the space was represented on screen, the layout of the facility and what was actually happening at any given point, I felt it was kind of bad because it was hard to tell where anyone was, things just didn't feel distinct. It was kind of like this complicated plot with characters running around evading Daleks. It didn't feel clear, where they were at any point, where they were going to, how they were getting around the Daleks, not passing by the Daleks. The space didn't seem like it was very clarified.
Why that annoyed me so much is the very previous episode, literally the last episode, had this great, impassioned, epic, memorable speech about space, about spatial aspects, about spatial objects, about the importance of spatial, spatial thinking. As you're got this to us so well as an audience. And so then this episode, us having such a poor spatial sense, I felt unmoored spatially. I don't think there was a really clear sense of geography in the episode, and that's a shame because I love the idea of using just one location. The director went back and watched Midnight for inspiration. And it's a cool COVID workaround. It's great because time loop plays into using the same location. That's another thing I love where, you're dealing with COVID constraints in a story generative way. That's all cool. So I like all the idea of it, but yet...
I think what we're missing here is the way that the themes have all come to a head following Flux. This is a story about time and space at war with each other. So it all means something. It was interesting what we were talking about, the visual sludge earlier on. It's interesting how much this felt like spatially, this felt like a sort of god complex, shifting hallways, unknowable space, sort of a heaven sent again, where you can't know the space because it's changing, except here it's not changing, it's just communicated poorly. But it felt like twisting corridors and space loops and whatnot because it just felt indistinct and vague.
It just became a lot of running around, and it really lost my interest. As soon as they just start running around in circles, it's oh my god.
The thing that Doctor Who always runs into in terms of the technobabble justification for whatever the ending is going to be is at least the ending usually comes down to the Doctor has to do a specific thing or needs something, and the companion goes and gets it, or the companion doesn't, the Doctor's off here doing whatever. I had no sense of what it was anybody was specifically required to do by the final time loop. The decoy plan was a neat idea in terms of dialogue, but in terms of what actually happened on screen, I couldn't tell you.
There's before I bring out a Chibnall quote for us all, I want to say there's stuff about the direction I really liked. I think the performances were really good in terms of, when we talk about Aisling improvising, it's not like a discrediting of the director.
No. You
can talk about the script, but the director is the one directing the actors. Her improvising and that, happening or, enabled to happen is part of what the director's doing. So, and also how, Astra was praising the Dan and Yaz scene earlier, and me too, the performances there, the director is obviously a big deal in these regards. So I think there's a lot of stuff Annetta did good in this episode, for sure. This Chibnall quote is one of the big challenges for Annetta was to keep things visually interesting in the setting of the storage facility. She rose to that challenge. The camera work is really mobile and fluid, and the whole episode is full of energy, colour, and wit. The way the pace and the colours change for every time loop.
I like the one time loop is all dark, and that's the one where everybody dies. So that's the hell loop. That's cool. And I did like one specific shot actually, which was when the Dalek comes up to the room that Jeff is specifically living in, with like the TV and the bed and everything.
Oh yeah.
And the camera shows it like the Dalek is in the hallway outside, looking in the door, and over the Dalek's shoulder we see like the fam just chilling on the couch, watching the TV. Now that was a nice scene.
Yeah.
I really liked the extermination effect, whiting out the screen to cut back to the beginning of the loop. When it's the last extermination of a loop, you know, it takes over the whole screen and then resets. I think that would be much more effective if this was a story with more perspective in it. If this was a Yaz story where we were specifically following Yaz, then that experience of getting exterminated and resetting the loop in one visual moment would be more effective. Here it's a bit odd, but it's still nice.
I liked color coding the loops a bit. I liked the green lighting a lot. It reminded me of Revolution of the Daleks, again, had those really green scenes. And didn't it do a cool thing when the lighting slowly changed, and that was like a story thing. Anyway, telling the loops apart was one thing, but telling the rooms apart I found harder.
The Revolution of the Daleks also featured a scene in what looked like a storage facility full of like green lighting, and
Yeah.
I totally thought that top floor room was somehow where the Daleks came from.
Me too.
It was so confusing.
Yeah, I thought Jeff was making the Daleks, and that was like the thing.
Me too. I thought it was going to be revealing something about Jeff, but again, Jeff is not actually a character.
Astra, did you like how the episode looked?
Yeah. No. Sometimes. I don't think it was like hugely visually interesting, but I think that was more to do with the setting. Like, I didn't have any particular issues with the sort of directing. I thought that was, you know, fine. I just feel like really there was only so much you could do with a setting like that. So, and I feel like I didn't notice it, like, sit there and go, wow, this looks terrible. I didn't think that at all. I thought it was, you know, it was just kind of nothing to me. But then I'm not as good as sort of recognising things like sort of directors' like, styles and things like that. I'm terrible with things like that. I will fully admit it. As it was mentioned before, within the Chibnall era, a lot of the sort of episodes seem to be quite samey in how they're presented visually, I guess. So nothing really stood out for me. I feel like the setting itself was the thing that meant that it wasn't really nice to look at. I did, you know, in some previous episodes there'll be moments that I think, oh, that's a pretty nice shot, you know, I enjoyed certain things, but this episode was like, there was no moment that stood out to me with regards to that. So really it was kind of like neutral for me. I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad, but it wasn't also standout or interesting or good on the same note. So it was just kind of it was competent. So that's pretty much it for me, at least.
On the idea that the top floor, we all thought that, you know, the Daleks were being made there or something. It's the classic Chibnall thing of you can't tell what questions are open and which ones aren't. You've got stuff like the reveal that the time loop's being caused by the TARDIS, which makes you go, okay. And, like...
It seemed likely.
There's a big misdirect going on. Yeah, there's a big misdirect where you think it's the Daleks, and then it's actually the TARDIS, and you go, okay, cool, who cares?
Yeah, the trouble with that is that the moment the TARDIS started to sort of essentially... whatever was going on with it, I was immediately like, oh, so we've got a time loop in the episode, there's something up with the TARDIS, of course it's going to turn out it's the TARDIS causing it. And like, I didn't, for me that wasn't even a question. I didn't think that was a mystery. So when the Daleks are being accused of you know, making the time loop, I was like sitting there the entire time like, I know this is just gonna, the Daleks are at some point gonna go, it wasn't us, it's you, and so that and the whole thing. So in fact, it would have been more interesting. Actually, it wouldn't necessarily be more interesting if it was the Daleks, because that would just be boring as well. But if there'd been something else causing it, but of course there wasn't really any other elements of the story that could have caused it, you know. So I just feel like that was like such a pointless, you know, thing to even happen. Like, I mean, I know it wasn't a huge, you know, thing, but it wasn't even a mystery, you know. There's
no implication from that. Like, it doesn't tell us it's not revealing that the Doctor's put everyone's life at risk because she made a mistake or anything. It's just, it's actually the TARDIS. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and there was no sort of consequence for it. There was no, it was just like, oh, okay, it's the TARDIS, whatever. And also, like, if they were going to trying to set up like some sort of mystery of what the source was, you could have done something like maybe they found Dalek technology, and it turned out it was, I don't know, something they brought to kill the Doctor. I don't know.
What you're talking about reminds me of Village of the Angels, when the little girl was revealed as the old woman, and I was confused because I was like, wait, were we not meant to know that? Like, I felt confused because like the episode doing a twist. I'm like, I thought we always knew this. The exact same thing with this episode. Like, obviously it was the TARDIS the whole time, and then when they like played a beat as if, oh, it's the TARDIS, I was like, what? But it's obviously the TARDIS. We had dialogue about this at the start, and we just had a whole series about, wacky, timey-wimey stuff that they're just fixing with the TARDIS. It was never going to be the Daleks. So that was confusing for me, yeah.
As Dan informs us, the entire universe is fixed now.
Yeah, saved the universe just last week.
Yeah, it's an absolutely classic. Chibnall just doesn't have a rein on what the audience is thinking at a specific time. He's not good at directing things. Part of that, I think, is that he's not really a joke teller. Joke telling is all about misdirection and understanding what the listeners are thinking and getting them to think the wrong thing so you can subvert it to the right thing. But he doesn't really do that, and there's moments where he gets the shape of that kind of structure, but doesn't make any meaning of it. Although, interestingly, considering Flux was just so much noise and chaos and no meaning, this does have, a message. This is about something in the broadest sense, in that the Doctor tells us all, well, if you keep trying at things and you tell people how you really feel, then one day you'll get there. And it's about the Doctor.
What's this telling us in the era of the pandemic and social media?
This is more of a pandemic story than Flux is, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're stuck inside a shitty room.
That rousing speech from the Doctor, it almost felt like kind of trying to make up for last episode when Azure asked Doctor what the point of life was, and the Doctor was just like, well, because it is, and it should just be
Give me
like
a few
that
weeks
for a
to work
reason.
it out.
Yeah, she's worked out the point of being alive now, guys. Yeah.
That speech, I was cringing during it. It was so... You know how some people say, oh, something was forced, and really it wasn't really, they just have some sort of ideological opposition to it. No, that speech was really just forced. It came out of nowhere. It was pointless. I don't know what I just don't know what it was like. I was sitting there I was so upset by it because I was like, this is just embarrassing.
What it sounded to me like was... Have you ever seen, there's some really cool subreddits that do it, where there's these chatbots or script things you feed a bunch of text into, and then they do a job of trying to approximate, realistic sounding text out of it. Yeah, I felt it sounded like if you put all the, Doctor speeches from this Doctor into one of those machine generated script things, you would get this speech. It reminded me also... that great Community anti-bottle episode where then they do a montage mashing up a bunch of speeches in a way that doesn't really make sense, but it has the rhythm of a speech that makes sense, and you put the music underneath it and it feels like a speech that makes sense narratively. It reminded me of that too. It's such non-specific nonsense, but it's the rousing speech.
Oh, just quickly, not really relevant, but the best Christmas present I gave this year was an AI written thriller novel, just the most generic thriller you could possibly read for someone who really likes generic thrillers. It was exactly this though. It's just words and sounds and rhythms that you recognize saying basically nothing.
Yeah.
The reason it really got to me, right? So first of all, when you were listening to it, it sounded like something you could go on, and I know this because my mum constantly shows me Facebook memes of inspirational quotes. Everything about it just had that sort of vibe to it. So just the most generic, just keep trying, and so it was it was completely meaningless, and what it was trying to say. There's no emotion behind it, no weight to it, specifically because it was just thrown in out of nowhere, and all I could think about was, they have limited time to deal with this sort of time loop situation, and the Doctor just stops everything just to have this pointless speech. And I can't even remember how the other characters reacted to it, but if I was standing there going like that, the Daleks are coming to kill us, and you're standing there like telling us to just keep trying, and sometimes you'll fail, but that's okay, just try again, and I'm like, that's great, but there's we're gonna get killed in a second.
13 is the hang in there kitten, Doctor.
Yeah, it made me think of those signs, like those wooden signs, where you get the quirky fonts, and then like some words will be really big, and then some words will be really little. And
my
it's like
mum has them too.
Yeah, those exact things.
There's like 5 of them in my bathroom right now.
And they're in it's in ambiguous order, where it's not really clear what. That's the experience I had trying to follow the speech, was that it was...
Yeah, you can read the words in any order and it makes just as much sense.
Yeah.
Love the big day when it feels in the way.
Yeah.
And do you know what's like, what was really like sort of empty about it, that it felt soulless, is the fact that I was sitting there going like that, I know this is a speech that was written, intentionally or not, to be taken as a small clip from the episode and passed around and used as, that's what it felt like. It was so isolated from the rest of the episode. It had no relevance to the context. She was given this speech as if the entire episode had been, I don't know, the characters were feeling downtrodden about being stuck in this time loop, and that they were feeling demotivated, as if that was the sort of, you would assume that a big speech like that, where the entire plot comes to a halt so that she can sort of speak to the audience, essentially, you would assume that it would tie in with the core theme of the episode, but there was nothing like that. The characters weren't really demotivated by the situation. They were, obviously initially it started out like, oh, this is quite a terrible situation, but they kind of got on with it. So suddenly it was just so out of place. It just didn't make sense. So it just comes across as soulless, specifically because it is like, Chibnall's like, I'm going to write a speech now, and it's going to be an inspirational speech for people to sort of refer back to and go on YouTube and rewatch, and they'll feel inspired by it. Like, I don't know,
I like what you're saying a lot, because when you're talking about things being written for forms that aren't the initial form they come in, I love that stuff so much. I think that's so interesting. And what video I'm thinking of here is, if we think of another inspirational speech a Doctor Who character has, the Doctor, in fact, about the possibilities that doing something over and over again grants you, and how you can make progress through that kind of telos. We have the breaking the wall montage from Heaven Sent, which a lot of people say, is the best episode of the show, and that's, a very watched YouTube video. That excellent
is, of
montage.
Course, Capaldi's Eve of the Daleks.
It's a similar episode. It's a time loop.
And like the thing is as well, like with the Heaven Sent sort of speech, and similarly other sort of Capaldi speeches that you've got that tend to be sort of, the YouTube video will get linked to people and all that. The difference between those speeches and this speech is that those speeches actually made sense within the context of the episode. They touched upon the core ideas. I mean, especially the Heaven Sent sort of, speeches was essentially the entire idea of the episode. It made sense that this monologue happened. Same with things, like the Doctor Falls, when he's speaking to the Masters and everything. That is a speech you can watch in isolation and it's really good, but when you watch it in the context of the episode, it's even better because it ties in perfectly with what the episode is trying to say. Whereas this speech from 13, you could remove it entirely from the episode and nothing would change because it is not relevant to anything that's going on. It doesn't cause any change in the characters. It doesn't affect anything at all. So when it's so isolated, and it's terribly written, I've got to be honest, just everything about it was just cringeable, which is harsh, but I just didn't enjoy it at all. But it's just the fact that it was just so pointless, and so it just comes across as from a place of Chibnall writing it specifically so that it can be used as a soundbite, rather than because it makes sense for the characters of the story, and therefore it just feels inauthentic.
When you're talking about the speech being kind of vacuous, I think in classic Chibnall era fashion, this gets us to a really foundational storytelling thing, which is that telling stories is inspiring and telling stories is memorable, and stories are how our brain likes to intake and remember information. That's why, we remember things through like mnemonics. We make up, like every good boy deserves fruit. That's how we remember something. It's a little mini story that we can put data into and then our brains take it in. It means something to us. Stories, narratives, the human brain loves this kind of stuff. So in the Heaven Sent speech, we get a story. It's not just the Doctor saying, I'm going to punch this wall because the next time I punch this wall, it's going to be a little bit smaller and one day I'm going to get through this whole wall. He's not saying that. He's using a metaphor. He's talking about the shepherd's boy tale. And that's inspiring to us because we have this imagery of this bird pecking at a diamond mountain and it's all poetic. It's imagery, it's memorable, it's a story. We remember this. What 13 is doing is she's just very directly describing stuff. She's saying, we make friends, we help each other, we improve. That's what being alive is. That's not a story. That's just her describing things directly.
Yeah.
She's not telling something to inspire them, like narratively. It's just very rotely like saying direct stuff as it actually is, which I think is weak storytelling.
Because there's nothing to say.
Which I think that fact that this is clearly written and it did immediately go up on YouTube as the Doctor's loop speech. It's clearly written for that purpose. It's a speech because this is the sort of point in the episode where you would have a speech, rather than because the characters need to know that. And I think part of that is because, weirdly, for a time loop story, this isn't about eternity. Time loop stories are always infinitely long. The person's been doing this so long that they have become pure cynicism and nothing means anything, and they've become sort of nihilistic husks. Where this is, the experience of the characters, if I've got my maths right, is about 50 minutes. It's a very short experience for everyone in the episode. Which is interesting. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but for a time loop, it means that kind of speech where you go, we've just got to keep going, and if we keep going for long enough, we'll get there eventually because we're humans and this is how we do it, doesn't work because they've not been doing this forever. They've been doing it for sort of 40 minutes. They've been doing it the length we've been watching it. It doesn't feel like a speech that would motivate people who are tired against all odds and unbelievably drained by the experience. It feels like a speech that comes roughly 4/5 into a Doctor Who episode.
And even if it was designed, if the story had been about their sort of demotivation, and she's trying to inspire them again, the things that she brings into the speech, the idea about, making friends and all that stuff, it has no relevance to their situation either. She's talking, so theoretically, if this was a different story and they were truly stuck in this time loop for a very, very long time and they were demotivated, so she gives a speech, if you just put that speech in unchanged, so it's meant to motivate them again, but it ultimately doesn't, how would that help any of them? And is the idea, because that we make friends and we fail and all this stuff, and that's great. That is something to do with life, and that is how life sort of functions. You do try things and fail and then try again. However, that doesn't really matter if you're going to go out there and make friends and try things out and fail at it, if the issue that you've got here is that you're being killed over and over and over by Daleks. So it's I agree, the idea that it doesn't really fit sort of what we'd expect a normal time loop story to sort of, the formula that you'd expect it to follow, but even if it did follow that formula, the speech would still be out of place and nonsensical for the sort of situation they're in. So it really, that's why I feel so cynical about it, because you just know it was written specifically for this reason, so that Chibnall is he's getting to the end of his era and he's like, oh Christ, I don't have a really inspirational speech yet. Moffat was great at them, I'll just throw one in here, so that someone can link it to each other. It's just
you've all become the cynical husks that was being said earlier.
Yeah, and ironically because of that speech. So.
Something, Heaven Sent does the community thing. It takes the one speech and dissects it across time. so that it's generalized to a general applicability, which is also ironic in its in the fact that it's being repeated again and again. It's so clever. There's no use of form in this version of Doctor Who. You could have had something like that. If this was an infinite loop, you could have had the Doctor given a bit of a speech, getting exterminated, trying to make progress, doing a little bit each time.
And the thing is, it's not like doing that requires, like, more money. It's not like that doesn't need VFX or anything. That's just creative editing.
Yeah.
Like, the Heaven Sent speech, it's all would have been material shot anyway, but it's been edited in a really interesting way. Like, it could have been done... I'm not saying this speech had to be edited like that, but we could have had some formalistic stuff in this episode using the time loop in interesting ways, but yeah.
I'd like to see that fan vid on YouTube. Somebody putting the shepherd's boy over her speech and then re-editing it to be like clips from the episode playing in succession.
We all make friends. We all stalk ex-girlfriends.
I just wanted to point out how incredibly shit the Daleks are in this story. And really, it's not the shitness that's the problem, but the inconsistency, because 1 minute they've got this amazing mega minigun that can spread shot 3 people at once, and then the next 5 seconds later they can't hit 5 people in straight in front of them in a straight line. It's so pathetic.
I thought Chibnall made the Daleks scary again.
Haha.
Say what you will about Revolution, it is vaguely about the Daleks, right? This is so not. This is powerfully not about them. They are just killer robots.
The sniper bots.
They're sniper bots, even to the duck, right?
Yeah.
They borrow the ducking under their guns from the sniper bots. Hilarious that works against Daleks.
We saw in The Day of the Doctor, that's how that was resolved.
Gallifrey ducked.
So you were talking about Daleks shooting each other earlier, and we were talking about the ducking and the machine gun on the Daleks, all this explosive stuff. Explosive feelings. You know, fiery shooting, fiery feelings. This is all making me think of something in Arachnids in the UK. A scene... Well, a set of scenes, really, a set of dialogue we remember very much from Arachnids in the UK that I think is really pertinent to this episode, and I think it's about time we started talking about it. And that is, in Arachnids in the UK, the Doctor admonishes Robertson for using guns. You know, we get guns are really, really bad. You know, in the Ghost Monument, guns, never use them. All this stuff about guns being really bad. This episode, I was kind of thinking, like, explosives good, guns bad. Like, it's back to this weird inconsistency, I think, with like the idealist point of, you know, it's the shape and form of a gun that's the issue, not you know, the destructive capabilities or the intent of the person. But like, why are explosions good?
I feel like this is... I'm not going to dig that much on Chibnall for this specific issue, because this is something that is so central to Doctor Who and its sense of violence and aesthetic that has been going on since like the first Doctor era. Like, as
rocks are okay, guns aren't.
Yeah, there is literally no difference between the second Doctor carrying around a couple of heat rays in the Ice Warriors versus if the Doctor had been carrying around a couple of Uzis. Although the heat rays obviously were more effective. That's the issue, is that the show is so terrified of guns, but it's so incapable of coming up with interesting and clever story solutions. I don't actually want the Doctor like using guns all the time and being cool with guns. I would hate that. I'd hate this homogenous thing of the Doctor becoming like other sci-fi. It's the triumph of brains, over brawn, or that kind of thing. I love that about the show, but when 13 has this consistent trait of being so moralistic about guns in situations where it feels like maybe not the most appropriate response, like in Arachnids, I think it kind of compels some of us to look askance at like you're okay with explosions, you're okay with this kind of thing, just because it's enough of a thing with this Doctor. Like the 10th Doctor as well, kind of merits poking fun at it more, because he gets the really moralistic, I'm the man who never would, stuff with guns. I think there's more intentionality with that, but like he's asking for some of this nitpicking, I think, because we're making more of a point about how he uses weapons. But like with Matt, I think it's much less of a thing, because he's not really getting those guns or speeches so much. But Tennant and Jodie do get those, so I think they kind of invite. The very first good look that people had at the 11th Doctor involved him shooting the gravity trap in that trailer from season 5. Or no, earlier, wouldn't it?
It was after the end of time, that trailer ad,
Yeah.
It's very sort of consistent with the Doctor and Jodie's era that she's very hypocritical about violence, about what is allowed to be done. You even had it in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, very straight off the bat, when she was criticising the guy, essentially criticising like that, when she blew up Tim Shaw, who she didn't know at the time also survived. She, as far as she was aware, he died. And then was it she blew him up and then she got pushed off or something?
He was dying. He was dying horribly, and then the other dude kicked him.
You had no right to do that. Yeah.
Yep. That's it. Yes. So that it was just like this hypocrisy. Like she's going like that. Well, she's essentially killed him as far as she's aware, but then she berates someone for in a sense trying to finish him off. She just wants to sort of so
she just very focused on her KD ratio
because literally, she doesn't want the assists basically. So but then she goes on to do this the same, and it happens. Arachnids, you get the sort of hypocritical thing of don't shoot the spiders, let's let them suffocate slowly to death instead, which was, I maintain, coming from someone who has a master's degree in animal welfare, that was one of the most fucked things I've ever seen. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that because it still makes me angry to this day. However, so that sort of form of death was the spiders was regarded as something that she thought was okay. Then you've got even as recent as Flux, you've got the same issue with the Suntarans. The whole idea that she was berating a guy for for blowing them up, for like using sort of explosives on, and it's just like, but then it's okay if she does it, there's just this inconsistency where it's like, it's almost like she says one thing and then does another, which again, it's, and I sort of referenced this before, it's this idea that Chibnall doesn't seem to have an awareness that he's doing this. So I would be fine with the Doctor being hypocritical about her morals, about things like that, as long as the episodes themselves seemed aware that this is what's happening. And you've had this before, like the Doctor has been a hypocrite before, but they always get called out for it, But within, which is fine, like Chibnall's era doesn't ever call the Doctor out when she does stuff like this, and like this is the thing, people have this idea that when you're criticising, like for example 13's hypocritical nature, these issues that keep arising, people go like, people act like you're trying to say that the Doctor should always be pure and never make wrong decisions, never do any of this stuff, which is why they keep bringing up this argument, like for example, if 13 does something that is very, very questionable, then someone will go, but 9, 10, 11, 12 did this, or,
you liked it just fine back then.
Yeah, it was fine back then when they did it, but then, for example, just off the top of my head, at the end of Flux, when the Doctor, does her genocide thing, essentially, and then someone, and I've seen this happen, someone going like that, yeah, but do you remember when 10 killed all those, spider people in Christmas special? It was fine when he did it then.
Oh, it was absolutely fine. There was no moral judgment in that episode at all.
But that's my point. Like people isolate the actions, and it's not about the actions. I, in a sense, don't care if 13's out there committing genocide, right? As long as the
Wow.
Okay. No, what I mean is I don't care even if the Doctor does something truly horrific, as long as the episode is aware that what they've done is something that is wrong. And with previous things, like for example 10, killing all those spider people, with Arachnos, it was.
All the little babies.
All the little babies. He was actively criticised. He was almost demonised in the episode for doing that. It was never presented as a good thing. So it's this idea that in isolation, yes, the Doctor across all regenerations has done something bad, but we're not talking about it in isolation, we're talking about it in context of the episode. How do the other characters react to it? How does the Doctors themselves react to it? Do they have an awareness that what they've done is wrong? Or do they continue believing that they were absolutely correct? And if they do continue believing that they were absolutely correct in the decisions that they made, does anyone call them out for that? You know? And not just that, it's the idea of how does the episode frame those decisions. So you look at the family of blood. That's the episode, isn't it? With so when 10 at the end condemns the family to these sort of horrific sort of situations, nobody actively sort of calls him out on that. Like, as far as I can remember, he doesn't have a moment where he doesn't have a moment where someone goes, "That was terrible, why did you do that?" However, the episode goes through great pains to depict him in a way that you should be scared of him. You shouldn't, think that what he did was the right thing to do. So it's not just whether or not there's a conversation about the Doctor's actions, but just how the episode chooses to frame those actions. And consistently throughout Chibnall's era, the Doctor not only has these bizarre moments where she criticises another character for something that she then goes on to do herself that is never criticised, but the episodes also consistently frame her choices as there's nothing remarkable about it. Yeah, there's nothing remarkable about it. So like she has this hypocrisy, and then the episode just seems unaware of the fact that they have contradicted what the Doctor said, sometimes even half an hour ago, things like that. So that's like the whole Chibnall era. It's so tonally inconsistent, and it doesn't seem to understand its own morals.
When you were articulating all that very well, I might add, in my mind I was thinking of all these other examples to add on to what you were saying. Like, I was thinking of how a good man goes to war, does all this kind of self-criticism stuff with the Doctor, and then I was thinking, well, Series 9 does it in a huge way, and then I was thinking Series 8 does it too, and the Christmas Invasion does it, and I just kind of realised this is just like really basic storytelling stuff. It's a curiosity in the main character, it's a curiosity in different perspectives and in ethics and stuff. And so we're coming back to this running theme we have with the Chibnall era of, rediscovering how foundational storytelling stuff tends to work.
Blows my mind that people after Flux were saying, wow, you were okay when the 11th Doctor blew up all those Cybermen at the beginning of Good Man Goes to War, but you're not okay with it now.
Yes, the episode was very positive about that, yes, for sure. It was all about how great the 11th Doctor was.
Yeah, the point of the title of that episode is how great it is when a good man goes to war. It's a good sign. We should be supporting that.
So many running themes of our channel, of our guys we're touching on here. The folk memory of stories and characters that are inaccurate, like how people remember the 11th Doctor always had big speeches and it was so annoying how he was so built up and saved the day. And then they cite like the Pandorica speech, like the Ackerton speech, like the Good Man Goes to War speech. All three of those speeches, those huge speeches, those, YouTube captured, watched many millions of times speeches, are all about the opposite of what they're saying. But there's like this folk memory of the 11th Doctor. And other running things we say, like this foundational storytelling stuff, incuriosity. Like, I was struck by when Oliver was talking earlier about this kind of formalistic incuriosity, how the episode gives all these opportunities, to creatively film or edit things, and then we don't do that. Yet Chibnall is instead, his investment is in... So it's like the era isn't interested in the form of the episodes themselves, as television, but it's interested in the form of violence. Like, that's where the investment lies. Like, in the form of a gun, it's one way, but in the form of an explosive, it's the other way. It's this really idealist view where the form of something is really interesting. Yeah, that beautifully said, Astra. I think that encapsulates so much stuff we like to talk about here.
While Astra was talking, what really struck me is that I realised that what the Doctor says in this episode, where she says that she didn't blow up all the Daleks, it was the Sontarans' plan and she hijacked it. That's an authentic and genuine representation of this era's morals.
Yeah.
I don't think we're meant to read that as a hypocritical moment. That is genuinely what this era believes. It's okay to blow up all the Daleks if the Daleks shoot the thing themselves. If they pull the trigger, it's fine. It's fine. There's no complication there.
That's another running theme we've been talking about for years, and especially us on the Fluxcast. It's about this avoidant criticism thing, this superficial reading where, hey, someone else did something superficially similar to this. It doesn't matter if it was handled in a completely different way. It doesn't matter if it was in completely different circumstances. None of that matters. Superficially, something was similar to another thing. Therefore, it's all groovy. It's all good.
But even though that, engagement with that line of thinking always illustrates that they just don't remember that, or don't care, didn't really watch it, or weren't really paying attention, or didn't really get it.
It doesn't even make sense. Like when people say if Russell T Davies wrote this, you would have liked it. What does it fucking mean? Russell T Davies never would have had characters like this at all. He never would have created characters so thin. Like, what kind of alternate universe are we proposing here? I do not understand what it even means. Like, is Russell T Davies inhabiting Chibnall's body and he has all these exact same characters and writing the same thing, and then we would have liked it? Is it just if it was the exact same script but Russell T Davies' name was in the credits, then we would have liked it? If he made this era? Like, none of it makes a lick of sense.
But if you were born in Chibnall's body and been through all his life experiences exactly the same and became the same kind of writer, you would write this script too. It's true.
I believe fully that Chibnall's era rewards the type of viewer that doesn't really give into introspection, that doesn't really care about thinking about grander things like themes. It's more just, and you see this very often within the fandom when people make these comparisons, these superficial comparisons, is very surface level, not aware of anything like context, or sort of framing or themes, or just anything that the episodes are actually trying to say. You see it the same with arguments about Hellbent that completely missed the point of that episode. Same with the hybrid arc, stuff like that. If something is not presented on absolute surface level, then it's completely missed. And Chibnall's era rewards that line of thinking because everything is very much surface level. Things happen and there is no sort of consideration about the effect of those things or the sort of consequences on the characters. It's just a collection of things happening, and there's just no sort of exploration beyond that. Whereas previous eras of the show were very, very much focused on, which again, it's basic storytelling stuff, they were focused on sort of the emotional consequences, sort of how framing an action can sort of affect how the viewer perceives it, or it should anyway. So very much when you have this discourse about Chibnall's era, it's too focused on actions and not about emotions, not about sort of, the sort of deeper level stuff. And Chibnall feeds into that so much, and I think that's why if you do have a tendency to care about stories on a deeper level, I don't see how you could be content with what Chibnall has written, because you dig a little bit beneath the surface and it falls apart immediately because there is just nothing tying it together.
I want to clarify, firstly, I don't like saying this, what I'm about to say, because I think it's very patronising and ridiculous and silly and annoying to hear me say this. And for me to say this...
Oh, this should be good.
It's patronising. It's bad.
Let's hear it.
But I feel like these takes, if Russell T Davies wrote this, you all would have liked it. I feel like they're so ridiculous that it kind of merits me having to preface this kind of conversation with what I'm about to say, which is there are intelligent fans of Chibnall's era, obviously. You guys might laugh and might disagree, but I very much believe there are intelligent fans of this era, and there are people writing intelligent stuff more positive on this era than I would.
Well, it can't be that hard.
But and there's stuff I like about this era as well, and someone once called me intelligent a long time ago, so there's my stake in the game. The stuff I like in this era, but the takes if Russell T Davies wrote this, you would have liked it, but another episode did something superficially similar, and I'm guessing you liked it then, so therefore you're being, ridiculous now. They are such thought-terminating, conversation-ending, incurious, arsehole things to say that I think they put us in this position of having these ridiculous discussions, like having to, preface, obviously, not all the criticism, positive or negative, around the Chibnall era is like this. But I think these people are lowering the conversation. They're lowering the discourse to such an inane level that these are the types of conversations we end up having. It is so ridiculous and avoidant and just fucking stupid to be saying stuff like, if another writer wrote this, you would have liked it. It doesn't even mean anything. It's just avoiding having a conversation in the first place. When we talk about episodes, we should be talking about the stuff in the actual episodes, as we've been doing. We should be talking about actual dialogue in the episodes, actual characterizations. When we compare it to stuff, it should be productive and to make a point. Like when we're comparing to Heaven Sent, we're making a point about how the specific dialogue in the speech in this episode was vapid because it wasn't crafting a narrative like the Heaven Sent speech was, and it wasn't formalistically edited in a way that ties into how television can be a great medium of its own. We're saying stuff. You know what I mean? We're pointing to specific things and we're talking about them. We're not trying to stop conversations by going, hey, assholes, there was once another episode, so shut the fuck up. It's just so ridiculous, and I hate it so much because I love talking about Doctor Who. I love talking to other Doctor Who fans who disagree with me, who agree with me. I love talking so much, and I think people like that, whether they know it or not, and whether they want to or not, I think they're kind of shutting that down on a level. They are bringing things down by those stupid, avoidant remarks like that. It really annoys me.
I think this is a direct consequence of how, and this is something that I notice, particularly within the Doctor Who fandom, and I've not really noticed it in others, and maybe it does exist in other sort of shows, but it's this idea that there's such a focus on who's writing the episode rather than just taking the episode by its own merit. So the reason that I sort of praise sort of Russell T Davies' writing and Moffat's writing, where they're good, because I'm not saying they're perfect, but the reason I praise them as sort of individuals, as individual writers, is because they consistently produce episodes that are more than competent. So that's the only reason that in discussion, and I have discussion with people where I do sort of bring up these names, bringing up Moffat and Russell T Davies and also Chibnall, but not so positively. But the reason I sort of highlight them is just because they do have this sort of consistency in how they write. And then you've got Chibnall, who doesn't have that basic level of competence, in my opinion. So, but it's like the only reason I've formed these opinions about these writers as sort of, not so much as people, because I don't really care about them as individuals, but more about sort of people in the sense of as writers, is because I have already assessed what they have written independently. However, what it seems like in the fandom is that you will get an episode and it's written by a particular person, and it doesn't really matter what's in the episode, it matters who wrote it. And you see this very, very commonly, especially with things like Moffat hate. I'm not going to make any judgment on him as an individual, because I think it is sort of, for some people they might believe this is relevant, and that's fair enough, but for me personally, I don't think, when I'm assessing an episode, I don't think it's relevant sort of what I feel about Moffat personally. But if I can look at the episode and it's competent, it's enjoyable, it hits all the right things that I would like to see in a Doctor Who episode, then I'm going to like the episode. I don't care if I dislike Moffat or if I do like Moffat or whatever I feel about Moffat at all. It's irrelevant. However, you will notice very, very commonly, and I highlight Moffat specifically because he has such a reputation within the fandom, people will see an episode as written by Moffat and immediately shut down any discussion about it. Similarly, it's the same issue that you're seeing with people going like that, if Moffat or Russell T Davies had written this, you would have liked it. It places too much emphasis on the writer as an individual rather than just stepping back and actually looking at what's in the episode. And so, in a sense, it's almost irrelevant who's written it. I don't really care that it's Chibnall writing these episodes that I dislike. It doesn't really matter to me who is writing them. The issue is, I am watching these episodes and I am not enjoying them. So,
Absolutely.
I was going to say, it's because they know there's just nothing to defend on the episode's own merits.
Yeah.
Well, it's avoidant, I don't know if they're all like that, but fundamentally, whether they my response to all this, that's a really good point by Astra on, the merits of an episode themselves. I think on this channel in particular, like guys like us, like our friend Tome Def, other Morph, other guys as well, we're really invested into the other work these three showrunners have done. We watch, all these other shows. We watch these little herd of, Moffat TV clips, that never got a DVD release. A lot of us do this kind of stuff, but this is never like, we're not building like a grand narrative of Chibnall or Moffat that then we pre-decide how we're going to respond to a new episode is. What all that stuff is it's a paratext. It's an extra layer that you can add on to and, contrast with each episode as they come. But it's never meant to be like a prescriptive thing. I don't decide before I watch a Chibnall episode, it's Chibnall, it's, Jodie's era, therefore I'm going to dislike it. Never. Because you can't be thinking prescriptively like this, because that's its own kind of avoiding criticism. There are Stephen Moffat episodes I hate, and there are Chris Chibnall episodes I love, even in the universe, because I'm not... There are Adrift.
Torchwood.
No, there are. I like the Power of Three. I like Countryside.
Power of Three, yeah.
I like Pond Life. Even recently, I don't love it, but I liked Once Upon Time more than I'd liked a Chibnall era episode in ages. I think Oliver and me might be more alone there than usual.
Yeah, I like it.
But yeah, it's you're never entering into something with like, hey, that name in the credits has decided how I'm going to feel. I don't feel that way. Astra doesn't feel that way. I don't think any of us feels that way. We watch the episode, but the thing is, we have all this context from the past episodes we've seen, or maybe the other shows we've seen, or the interviews we've read and everything. And those are additional things to readings, but they're not pre-deciding a reading. Moffat has said some stuff I really dislike before. I imagine some of us are the same. But that doesn't make me, before Heaven Sent comes up, we're going, oh, we said that thing in 2010, so I'm going to dislike this. Like, that's not how any of this works.
What do you say in 2010?
And what with Karen Gillan, she's the very, very first person, oddly enough, I ever saw do the Amy Pond lines. But I saw them on DVD, this DVD they'd made. And I remember thinking, well, she's really good. It's a shame she's so wee and dumpy. Because she looked wee and dumpy in the video. And I was thinking, that'd be all right. And then
How did she look wee and dumpy on the video?
I don't know, it was a magic video.
No,
up until that point, I was honestly expecting a wee sort of beach ball to come in with the red hair. And then I walked past her in the corridor, and this giant flame-haired goddess walked past me and thought, right, okay, not wee and dumpy then. So, in fact, slightly too tall for my comfort.
Or stuff he said about he said some weird shit about being male that I don't relate to. I don't know what males he's talking to. Anyway, and Chibnall has said things I like, but I don't think, hey, this guy said something I agree with politically once, therefore I'm going to love everything you ever do forever. And I don't think the opposite way around as well. That's all important context, and it's important paratext, but it doesn't pre-decide how we feel. And I agree with Astra that in the Doctor Who fandom, this is very normalised, and so we think it's all really normal. I'm not sure it really is, this idea of pre-deciding things based on the writer's name.
I think it's becoming more popular in this day and age because there's a change in how we engage with media, as opposed specifically how we engage with television, as opposed to how we largely did years ago in decades past.
And engaging with creators, and I think things like nowadays with even with social media, there's less of a sort of distance between viewers and creators, so the issue is people are more aware of the creative sort of teams behind certain works, and so
that's true.
For better or worse, that informs what people will expect from those works. However, I've never noticed it be so prevalent in any other sort of fan base compared to Doctor Who, and it is both sides of the coin. You have writers that are absolutely venerated who, you only need to look at the response to when Russell T Davies was announced to come, as coming back to the show, and the absolute celebration. But I'm telling you right now, if people had the same attitude towards or sort of Okay, let me clarify. So, Moffat has said some things in the past that I strongly disagree with. Absolutely. He has said some very questionable things. And because of this, he has developed this... Fandom has developed this attitude towards him where everything he does is automatically shit. It can't ever be good because he said something bad once, whatever. Which, and... Okay, fair enough, if that's the sort of attitude you want to take. However... What confuses me about the Doctor Who fandom's attitude is that people are very selective in how they apply this sort of line of thinking, in the sense that Russell T Davies has also said things I disagree with and I am deeply uncomfortable with. But for some reason, so basically what I'm saying is, it's this idea that for some reason the Doctor Who fandom has these predetermined ideas of what they think of certain writers, regardless of what the writers have actually done or said, or in terms of episodes themselves actually produced. So you get this idea that if it's a Moffat episode, it's bad because Moffat's bad. If it's a Russell T Davies episode, it's good because Russell T Davies is good. If it's a Chibnall episode, well, there's a bit of a division here, but generally you get this idea, well, and I've seen this very commonly, Moffat is like the sort of baseline for a lot of people, so I've seen very, very often people go like that, well, this thing in this Chibnall episode wasn't very good, but do you know what? At least it's not Moffat. And this is such a bizarre... It's such a bizarre way of approaching episodes and approaching writing, just everything. The idea that it's something to do with the identities of the writers, and I'm not saying that the sort of writers' identities and their views and things like that can't affect what they're writing. Absolutely, of course it can, which is why sometimes it is important to understand this context and how they came to sort of write certain things they did. However, there is this exactly as Neil was saying, there's this sort of prejudgment that goes on, and also judgment in the sense that even when people identify issues in Chibnall's writing, it doesn't really matter what the issue is because at least it wasn't so-and-so writing it, so people are a lot more forgiving of Chibnall's missteps because he isn't Moffat. On the same note, Moffat writes some really good stuff. He's also written some very questionable stuff, but the questionable stuff gets focused on more because, oh my god, it's Moffat. Similarly, if Russell T Davies has written questionable stuff, and he has, that is also forgiven because it's Russell T Davies, so they focus overly much on the good stuff. Anyway, it is just this very bizarre attitude towards writers. I just don't understand where it has arisen from. It's very strange, and it makes discussion about episodes and their quality and the quality of writing very, very difficult because, exactly as Neil says, people present sort of their arguments are very thought terminating. They just don't, they shut down any possible discussion about the episodes themselves because once you know the writer, you already know what people's opinions are going to be. So it's bizarre.
Our fandom is just such a, it's there's so many landmines lying around. It's like, I think we've all had this, to some extent, this sort of encounter before, where you find out somebody makes a reference to Doctor Who, or references being a fan of Doctor Who, and you're like, I wonder if I could be friends with them. And so at some point in the introduction, in the communication, there's like this feeling out of, okay, but like, what kind of Doctor Who are you into? Where you like bring up an episode to see if they'll, bring up an episode like
Kill the Moon.
Yeah, or I was gonna say Flesh and Stone. There's another one.
Yeah.
Where you just bring it up to see how they react to the era or the writer, and it's so factionalized. I would never, if I'm in line with somebody and I see that they're wearing, a TARDIS pin or something, I just keep my mouth shut.
Same.
Yeah.
I don't want to know more people like me than I already do.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
Well, I do.
But it makes it difficult because if you enjoy episodes from Moffat's era, you almost I don't want to sound like, I'm not saying like, I'm not saying it in the sense that I feel like Moffat's stuff you're victimised. No, absolutely not. But this this over focus on the writers and their identities means that it's very difficult to have conversations about stuff that you do like in Doctor Who, just because it's not that I feel absolutely, I do not feel like a victim for liking Moffat's, a lot of Moffat's stuff.
You should.
But on the same note, it's there is this air of hostility towards certain writers and certain and also this air of forced positivity also towards other writers, and it's like, the issue for me is that you can't really have a truly unbiased, neutral conversation because nobody wants to engage with, for example, criticism about Chibnall or criticism about Russell T Davies, but on the same note, nobody is willing to engage with sort of discussion about positive things in Moffat's era and things like that. So you can't really truly have a proper, nuanced discussion because you've got this thing where people are expecting you to say Russell T Davies good, Moffat bad, Chibnall good, and what that means is it just shuts down conversation on the whole, and in reality all of them have issues and all of them have good points. Maybe Chibnall a bit less good points.
Some.
No, I'm just being mean, but there's things I like about Chibnall too. It's just that it's very, very hard to discuss it.
I love his shirts.
Good shirts. He's got such a good look.
He does
really
have really good
great.
shirts.
He's stunning.
But do you know what I mean? It's like very, very difficult to have these nuanced discussions because people too often come in with these predetermined attitudes towards certain eras, and it's just like, I just want to discuss the episodes. I don't really care about the writers, When
you meet a Doctor Who fan in the wild, there's no higher tension than before they finish the sentence, oh, well, I stopped watching when.
Yeah.
Everything tips on that point.
The horror scenario is like, you say, oh, I loved Capaldi's era, blah, blah, blah. And someone's like, oh, well, did you like it when Moffat fridged? And then they're like, spoiler Sherlock thing for you.
Yeah.
Like, you enter into such factionalized shit with these discussions.
That'll be in your case especially because you're the only person in the world who watched his era, religiously and yet hasn't seen Sherlock.
I'll get around to it one day.
Have you genuinely not?
Neo hasn't seen Sherlock.
He's genuinely not.
It's nice to have a Moffat thing to save. I've seen all his other shows.
Madness.
It's one of his most sort of well-known, iconic shows, and in fact, the show that caused the absolute animosity towards him nowadays. So it is. It's bizarre that you've not watched it.
One day.
It's also very relevant to his Doctor Who work. It is incredibly important to his Doctor Who work.
We'll do pods on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll all talk about it one day.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway.
So, building off all what we've been saying, two things come to mind for me. One is when Astra was talking about how it's weird that we're so creator, person focused, and Miros was talking about how this is kind of a modern thing with media now. I think it kind of comes back to how earlier we were talking about how the brain loves narratives and the brain loves stories. I think we get these kind of meta narratives with creators themselves, and especially with Doctor Who, a show that trades creatives. It's like we get this overarching narrative of the show itself as it was good in Russell T Davies' era, and then the satanic fall, the bad man came. It's that classical storytelling thing, the rise, the fall, the rise again. Moffat ruined it, and then we come back and Chibnall raised it and he made it great again. He made Doctor Who great again. I think these kind of narratives around a show become part of how we invest in a show in the first place, and sometimes it's before a show is even aired. But I think that's part of if we find ourselves attracted to a showrunner or attracted to the type of stuff they write in some cases, then we'll get invested in these kind of things. I really like Brian Fuller as a showrunner. I think he's an interesting person. So I've watched everything he's done except the Star Trek stuff. But I'm invested in the types of narratives he does, and I'm invested in the way his career's gone. So that's a meta narrative that Brian Fuller isn't in American Gods, but he's kind of a storyline in real life that I get invested in and I follow along with. And a lot of people, and we're like this for Moffat too. So I think that's interesting how we kind of narrativize creatives themselves, and especially in Doctor Who. Some people have weird narratives, man, about some of the classic Who guys, ones I disagree with a lot. But people will have these, narratives of, well, it was good in the 60s and then it was bad and then it was good again in the McCoy era. This is, a lot of this I agree with, but it's we're putting these narratives onto the show. And that's part of, especially in a huge mess, a huge sprawling mess like Doctor Who with a million stories and a million different people writing them. I think we kind of need the narrativization to engage with it in the first way, but it can go too far, for sure. That's point one. My other point is I was thinking back to Nick in the special and like the entitlement stuff we were talking about earlier. And like when we were talking, especially Astra, talking about like how people get very set in their ways with certain creators and they refuse to consider, other views or whatever. I agree with all that. But I do think like sometimes the kind of straw man that happens is like people might not want to keep engaging
That's true.
with a person. Like our friend Tomtit has stopped watching this era of Doctor Who. That's why he's not on these podcasts anymore. He doesn't watch it anymore. So, some people will have their own lines. And for some people, it'll just be like they don't like a show anymore. And for some people, it'll be like, hey, that director said something that annoys me so much that even in a vacuum, I might enjoy his future movies, but I don't live in a vacuum. I live in a world where I'm aware of something he said or something he supported. Therefore, I'm not cool with watching his movies anymore. Like, that's always the option too. Like if Stephen Moffat seriously frustrates you and makes you feel so negative about things, that makes total sense. That's totally cool.
Yeah.
What you could do is stop thinking about Stephen Moffat all the time. Like, that's another option you can have. I don't know, in some spaces that's harder than others. Like in some fandoms he's going to come up even if it's not a Doctor Who thing. But I think, and we talked about this in earlier Fluxcast as well, I think sometimes we forget the agency we have as fans with things. Like, you can always choose to stop engaging with a guy, or with a showrunner or with a creative. And I think that's something we should exercise more as well in these kinds of scenarios.
You're right.
Yeah.
We should stop watching Doctor Who.
I want to quickly sort of pick up on that. So
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct, and I don't want it to seem that, and I know you weren't trying to accuse me of this. I just want to clarify that.
Oh, I was.
That I don't. Rude. But what I mean is, so when I'm saying the idea of focusing on episodes, I don't mean that in the sense that people, if Stephen Moffat genuinely makes them uncomfortable, completely understandable. I know the sort of stuff he said. That's fine. I don't vibe with him as a person. However, I am capable, for him at least. There's other creators that they've said stuff that I can no longer engage with their works just because it's just too much, and I think that's completely respectable to make that choice. But it's completely fine to make that choice, and it's all about your own comfort. And certainly I'm not encouraging anyone to engage with media sort of produced by someone that they are not comfortable engaging with on any level. But what confuses me about Doctor Who's fandom specifically is that, as much as I respect this line of thinking completely, it is that it seems to be applied in very inconsistent ways. And the reason I brought up, for example, Russell T Davies having said and written things that were quite uncomfortable, is that they get glossed over and ignored in discourse and discussion about writers, and that is what confuses me about it. It's not that I disagree with anyone's choice to stop engaging with Moffat's era, sort of his writing. It is the fact that he is singled out as if he is the only writer in the history of Doctor Who has ever said or done something questionable. And it's not to.
Oh, if only they knew.
And it's not to suggest that anything Moffat has done or said is I'm not downplaying it. I understand what he has done, or written and said and everything. However, it is just also equally uncomfortable to me the way that other things that other writers have written or said are happily ignored, and it just is very strange that people have this discourse and have these discussions about writers without actually seeming to know what exactly they have said or done. And certainly I see the same arguments parroted about Moffat and what he has said and done, and actually, ironically, none of them ever seem to touch upon some of the stuff that I think he has written or said that I find most uncomfortable. They're always the same surface level things. I don't like Moffat because he can't write women. That is always the number one thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just confused about it, basically.
I think the Chibnall era kind of tricks us into thinking that kind of narrative paralysis or narrative stasis is normal and the way things work. But people can change over time as well. Moffat's writing of women in the Matt era is not his writing of women in the Capaldi era. You know,
Absolutely.
things change as well.
Yeah, and like, and even if someone is still unwilling to engage with his work because they've been so soured by the previous stuff, that's completely fine. It's up to the own like viewer. However, it is my issue with that and how Moffat has, changed over time, is that people assume, without having watched the Capaldi era, that it is identical to the issues they had during Matt's era, and so there's a huge amount of people, and this is something I take issue with because the Capaldi era is my favourite out of New Who, but there's an awful lot of people who are like who chose to skip it. They didn't watch it, and then when I try and talk about it or express any love for it, and I've had this happen so often, if I talk positively about these episodes about the Capaldi era, someone always chimes in and says, but it was written by Moffat, and immediately I am made to feel bad, as if I am engaging with work that
it's like guilting
that I shouldn't, that I should be guilty about for engaging with Moffat's work. And in reality, it's I agree that there are huge issues in Matt's era, for example. However, those issues that I had in Matt's era are not present, in Capaldi's era, which is why I can enjoy that era. But I'm made to feel bad for that. It's the thing is, people can talk about whatever they want and have the opinions on whatever they want. What I disagree with is the way that nobody is allowed to talk about about certain things, and whether that be talk about it positively or negatively, without someone immediately jumping in going, hey, you can't think this because this was written by so and so. And what I mean by this is, like, if you're positive about Moffat, someone will jump in and go, well, it's not good because it's Moffat. Similarly, if you're negative about Chibnall, someone will always jump in and be on the defensive about Chibnall. Same with Russell T Davies. And again, it just comes back to this weird, almost parasocial relationship that people have with these writers, that they believe that they have to defend them and have some sort of like direct connection to them. And it's like, it's bizarre.
The thought that comes to me is part of this whole mess is also, I think, not everyone agrees with me here. I don't think Doctor Who is like all the one show.
Yeah.
I know some people do, and they find that inspiring and stuff and affirming. I don't think of it that way at all. I don't think of 2005 to 2009 Doctor Who as the same show as now, or the Moffat's era. I don't even necessarily think of the Matt era and the Capaldi era as the same show like we were thinking. Like, when creatives change, when main casts change, when types of stories change, in lots of other television and movies of this would be seen as a greater shift than I think it is in Doctor Who. I think we have this idea of it all being the one big show, and like, sure, in a way, yeah, there are certain tropes that persist through the whole thing, but even like the fundamental story mode of it's a narrative where we go on adventures through space-time, not always. It isn't always like that. There are eras that aren't like that. It's a narrative where we do a new adventure every week. Flux wasn't that. The Pertwee era wasn't the normal mode. There are all types of things that are different modes. But even if it was all the same narrative mode, the creatives change so much and the style changes so much that I don't see it as all the same type of show. But obviously, it's called the same thing, and like Series 5 is Series 5, not Series 1 2.0. So I think a lot of people kind of see it as the one show in the sense that even if Stephen Moffat really rankles them, they kind of feel like, well, I like the RTD era, I like Doctor Who, I'm going to keep watching.
Ergo, I have to engage with... That's what, honestly, that is what's been keeping me here for the past 3 seasons. I stopped watching Doctor Who. When I was a kid, I really disliked Last of the Time Lords, and I wasn't vibing with the Tennant era hugely in general, so I stopped watching. And I didn't watch it for years. And then later I came back to it. I rewatched Series 4 and I loved it when I watched it, as an adult. As a kid, I'm not sure I would have liked it. And I don't think we all need to keep engaging with Doctor Who all the time. I know, like Mira says, this is perhaps not the best example, since not all of us feel great about the Chibnall era we're watching. But that's, I think, another thing is because Doctor Who, it's all got the same name, people kind of feel like, well, I need to keep watching because I like Doctor Who. But this Doctor Who isn't the last Doctor Who, isn't the last Doctor Who. There are over a dozen, there are over 2 dozen, over 3 dozen Doctor Who's out there, I think. Of course, I don't think you're always going to like all of them. That's only natural. They're very different shows. I think that's the great thing about Doctor Who. But yeah, it's a complicating factor. Gig, do you have any thoughts on all this stuff?
Well, You know how at the end of Flux, Chib's talking about how the Doctor has this emotional journey that she's gone on, and in the scene near the end of the final episode, she finally, sort of indicates a willingness to talk to Yaz. She apologises to Yaz for being so secretive and so on, and that's her character growth or whatever. And it strikes me that at the end of this episode, Eve of the Daleks, that has essentially been reversed, because the Doctor is now back to just not telling Yaz about... The Doctor says, time's catching up with me. And Yaz is like, what does that mean? And the Doctor's like, nothing. Never mind. So the one fragment of character development that 13 got over the last series has already been, shit canned, basically, just erased. And I think that's a perfect illustration of why this era, and that narrative paralysis that you talked about, and the incuriosity about character that we've talked about, and how I think it's just in this era, just the total absence of anything has just led to this putrefaction, this self-cannibalization, this fandom derangement that has just led all the already awful tendencies in the fandom to become twice as bad.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think the avoidant strain in the fandom, if RTD wrote this, you would have liked that? Do you think to some extent that's evolving out of the era being kind of in an avoidant mode with the storytelling?
Yeah, I think it is.
Wow, that's really impressive. I mean, I blame the bad quality of the fandom on a lot of things, but of course they're all terrible people. The show's terrible is a new one for me, and I applaud sincerely, because it's a good point.
I think it makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, fandom, or our experience of fandom, is just a selection of whoever is talking the loudest at any given time, and who are we seeing more, who's popping up more, who's getting dominance over the conversation, and that is going to be contingent on what the source text or the era of the show is like. And in this case, with the era of the show that's just so vacuous and so incapable of providing anything to really latch onto, and I realise this may let us segue into Thasmin in a minute, which we somehow haven't done in 2.5 hours.
That's what the additional 2 hours are for.
I think with an era like this, it just leads to all these kind of amnesiac takes, if RTD had written it, just the slurring of everything together into a sludge, and just nothing means anything anymore. And that's a thing we've returned to again over the last few years as well.
I want to be clear that we're all in our bubbles. I'm not seeing the matrix of all Doctor Who fandom out there. I can't do that. I wish I could. I know it sounds torturous, but I would love to be able to read every fanzine and read every blog and see a lot of YouTube videos. I would like to be more aware of the fandom than I am. I try a lot, but there's only so many hours in the day, and we all have lives as well. We can't interface with it endlessly. But so I want to be clear, I'm somewhat blinkered in my perspective here, and there's no way I can possibly say all fandom is like this. There's no way I can know that. I wish I could. I try to read a lot of stuff, I try to watch a lot of stuff, but all I have, we all just have blinkered views because we can't intake that much information. That said, what you were saying there, Gig, was making me think. I know in the Fluxcast, I think me, and I think Oliver too, had been talking about how we would like to read more positive criticism, of the Chibnall era that's long form. That would interest us for sure. And then I was remembering, in the Capaldi era, I saw loads of that stuff, and even to this day, I still see there are fan projects evolving out of the Capaldi era in that way. There's that fan Clara the Untold Adventures thing to come out that I'm really interested in. In the Capaldi era, I remember I was, if anything, less into the fandom then than I was now. I read more stuff now. I keep up with all the magazines now. I read more stuff now in the Chibnall era, and yet in the Capaldi era, I remember more kind of long-form stuff I like to read, about the show. And it just kind of hit me that this thing we're kind of floating around as a possible idea of the show itself kind of merits the discourse that comes around it. That kind of tracks with it, doesn't it? The Capaldi era was the type of era that I think we'd say encouraged this kind of long characterization analysis, is because I think it was putting that kind of stuff out there to analyze. I think we had quite complicated characters and complicated relationships that the show was curious about and evolving in complicated ways. And so that was kind of reflected and refracted in the fandom. And now we have stuff like we were going to talk about with Thasmin. We have character beats people might argue are there or are not. There's a lot of ambiguity, and I think that's part of where maybe the more factionalist stuff comes out, because is there less in the actual show to talk about, and therefore things kind of turn inward. They kind of curdle, a little more in a meta way about the fandom itself.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Thasmin is a hot button issue because, I mean, we're leaving aside the culture war stuff. There's also the idea that so much of the Thasmin discourse revolves around various groups of people insisting that there is objectively something being put on TV that other people insist objectively is not. And that's a breakdown of, consensus reality. And living in America, I can tell you that that's always really good for discourse.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but that's the politics, right? It's the fracturing of a shared understanding of an actual existing material thing. The show so fails to put a single vision on screen that the fandom becomes a political base divided by its totally distinct and mutually exclusive understandings of reality. It's politics. Yeah.
And it's so high stakes when it comes to Thasmin in particular, because in the competing interpretations of the show, one of them has not only character development and an interesting story, but also queer romance as well in there as well. Whereas in the other interpretation of the show, none of that is there. So it's
literally none of those things.
Yeah, so it's this whole epistemic crisis around not only the show being good or interesting, but the show being a show at all, having characters in it at all.
Yeah.
So it's really just the highest possible stakes it could be.
This is a great primer. Can I give my little timeline spiel about Thasmin stuff now if we're going to go into that?
Yes, please.
There's some context I want to give to this because I think we need to think a little bit about the timeline from 2018 to really wrap our heads around what this means and what's happened right now. So, first of all, I want to think back to before Series 11. I want to think back to that time I started getting that cold cynicism about this era. The promotional run for Series 11, the press tour for Series 11, when the stuff that was being said about the era was starting to make me, and I know make Gig as well, go, huh? The Pillar of Hope stuff, some of the kind of vacuous way stuff was being described, was raising my alarms a bit.
You're talking about that one clip, what's that line about there's people from all across the spectrum in Chibnall?
Yes, that's what I'm going to get to.
Yes, final.
In the promo run, so before Series 11 premiered, but when, it was being promoted, Chris Chibnall and Matt Stevens were in an interview. And so Matt Stevens, who's the exec producer, he's the other, big head of the show, besides Chibnall. Speaking to Digital Spy, Matt Stevens said something really interesting, and which I've never forgotten, and I've thought about a lot over the years. What Stevens said before Series 11 started, but on the press tour for it, it had all been filmed, it was ready to go now. What Stevens said was, since the show came back in 2005, I think Doctor Who has been amazing at blurring the edges of sexuality and being quite gender fluid about the characters and relationships. I'm not going to say if any of our characters are or are not at this point LGBT, but it is part, I think, of the DNA that Russell T. Davies, re-imbued into the show. There will be characters from across the spectrum. So, this is what was said. This was the promise made before Series 11 started. So, other context, I think, is important. Obviously, we'll get into the episodes themselves. Well, Rosa, I think, is important. I think we're going to rush to talk about arachnids in the UK, but there's something in Rosa, I think, that's really worth bringing up as well. Two things, actually. So there's an exchange in Rosa that Yaz and Ryan have, where Yaz says that she snuck into a boy's room when she was a teenager, and Ryan is like, oh, that boy, he was punching above his weight, and Yaz is like, are you complimenting me? This is our first, perhaps, het marker for Yaz. And on an interview, contemporary around that episode, Mandip said, I'm not going to rule it out, it being like a crush between Ryan and Yaz. Never say never. At this point, it's a little bit fun. I just think they're trying to find their feet in the world, but there's sometimes when she finds Ryan really annoying, like an annoying brother. So that episode had a little thing which we could read as a het thing with Yaz, with a possible Ryan crush on Yaz or something like that. Then Arachnids in the UK had two scenes I've watched so many times. But the first one is when Yaz's mum brings up, are you seeing my daughter? The doctor, who are you? Who are you in my daughter's life? And the doctor says, are we? Are we dating each other? And Yaz says no, and like the mum's like, oh, okay. And then we'll get into our interpretations of that scene. I'm just giving the straight facts now. Then the end of the episode has Mandip beam up at Jodie in her performance when she's talking about, you're like the best person I've ever met, and I want to travel with you, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, and then across the years, in Spyfall 1, Sasha and Mandip play a bit of a flirtatious thing between their characters. There's a shot where they kind of nudge each other. Mm-hmm. So there's another hit marker for Yaz. Diodati had that line about my person's a bit different, where it's like Yaz equivocating with, like a crush that the romantics are having. Although that one more ambiguous than the arachnid scene. At least it was received more ambiguously in the fandom.
Widely. We
go on. In the Timeless Children, Yaz yeets herself into the portal immediately to find the Doctor. Revolution of the Daleks, this is a really interesting one, has this exchange. Well, has a few things, but the one I'm really thinking of is when Captain Jack is talking with Yaz, and Captain Jack says, had a rough time then without the Doctor. Yaz, I don't know what you mean. I saw the way you shoved her. You thought she wasn't coming back, right? You're guessing a lot from a shove. I have my own experience with the Doctor, and I'm thinking back to Parting of the Ways now.
Oh, yeah.
Yaz, I just missed her. I never stopped to think. And Jack goes on, I quite like this scene. Hey, when I was with the Doctor, I saw more than I could have dreamed, and then we lost each other. I don't know what happened to him, if he was alive, or if I was ever going to see him again. Being with the Doctor, you don't get to choose when it stops. Whether you leave her or she leaves you, Yaz goes, it felt cruel to be shown something I couldn't have anymore. Felt like I'd rather not have known. Come on, this is such a thing you feel with relationships. I very much think this... Anyway, we'll get into that later. I'd rather not have met her, because having met her and then being without her, that's worse. How do you deal with that? Come on, that is such a... Yeah, okay. Then Jack says, how many people in the universe get to meet the Doctor, let alone travel with her? We're the lucky ones, Yaz. Enjoy the journey while you're on it, because the joy is worth the pain. Yaz is also very obsessed with the Doctor in that episode. Like, we get the weird stuff where she's obsessed in the TARDIS, just sleeping in there, trying to find the Doctor.
Just the Pepe Sylvia wall covered in stuff.
Yeah. Then Survivors of the Flux has Yaz rewatch the hologram, kind of moon over the hologram of the Doctor a lot. Some Mandip comments I think are worth noting now, over the years. Mandip has commented on Thasmin, on the idea of a romance or a crush between... Well, the thing is, I want to get into this too. Thasmin is a complicated term, because I think some of us mean different things by it. When I say it, I'm using it as a shorthand of like Yaz having a crush on the Doctor, because it's like that's the romance thing. But some people think like Thasmin, when they say it, they mean the idea of the Doctor and Yaz actually having a relationship. People mean different things by this term. But the idea of a romantic pairing between them is, suggested through Yaz having a crush, even if it's unrequited. So these are some Mandip comments on Thasmin from over the years. The first one is from 2019, February, an interview with the Metro. Mandip is saying she's aware of Thasmin, and she says, I'm aware of it now, but at the time I was filming, it was never a thing. It must just have been natural chemistry between Jodie and myself. After it came out, I was like, wow, I didn't even think that was a thing. I didn't think it was a thing until I saw people mentioning it online. I think it is just a natural thing that can happen between friends, or who knows where it's going to go. The next quote from Mandip is from the December holiday issue of SFX magazine, 334. So the question was to Mandip, what do you think of fans shipping character romances? Mandip replies, me and the Doctor, I love it. The fan art is just out there.
That's, of course, exactly the first place she goes, not me and Ryan, not me and Graham, not...
It's good, innit? You want a character and storyline. Wow. You want a character and storyline. Even though that storyline wasn't there, you want people to be talking about it. I don't want it to just stay on screen. I want people to relate to it or have seen something in our two characters that they think could go on a different journey. So to me, I'm here for it. I'm not saying it happens or it doesn't happen. Even if they were to do it, say, with a different character, it's like, well, at least I feel like my character's three-dimensional and realistic and they're able to relate to it. The last Mandip quote is from 2021, October 28, Radio Times. So Radio Times sets us up by saying, certainly Yaz seems to dote on the Doctor. In her last appearance, when abandoned by a friend, she'd taken to sleeping in a spare TARDIS. So when we caught up with actor Mandip Gill recently, we asked whether romance could still bloom between their characters. Mandip: obviously, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say if it was happening. But it could do, because they've spent so much time together. That's what happens to people naturally. However, Gill also cautioned that fans don't buy a hat for Yaz and the Doctor's wedding just yet, noting that the duo's closeness doesn't necessarily mean they'd become involved romantically. Meant it. It could also head down the route of it being platonic, because two people are allowed to travel together and not have that relationship. People have asked about it, people have wanted it. Me and Jodie Whittaker, have a lovely relationship as people, as actors, and our characters have a really, really nice relationship, and I think it's been written very naturally. Still, while she wouldn't be drawn on specific story points for the series, Flux, or the upcoming collection of 2022 specials, Mandip teased that Yaz and the Doctor's relationship would develop one way or another in the new episodes. Mandip, I'd like to think where it heads, people will have gone, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be, she told Radio Times. That's all the context I wanted to set everyone up with. So yeah, let's talk Thasmin.
Honestly, when the Thasmin scene hit on my first watch, it took me completely out. Nothing else that followed in the episode. I didn't follow any of it. My head was just spinning from Thasmin. The rest of the app was a blur.
Because after Yaz had that admission, I was just like, holy shit. And that's all I could think about. And I was waiting, the entire time I was just waiting for a return to the Thasmin stuff. And then we just got a little bit at the end.
I usually don't watch the episodes for 24 hours or whatever after they transmit. But I had multiple people reach out to me and tell me, Neo, make sure you avoid all spoilers for this one. I get 40 minutes into this episode, I'm thinking, what the hell were they warning me for? I was thinking, is Tennant going to show up? Is we going to have an early regeneration? Or a world enough in time flash forward to the regen or something? I had no idea what they meant until, damn, that look.
Oh god, it's I still can't believe it.
Oh my god, I was cheering.
Some of the things you consider to be essential Thasmin and not considered to be essential Thasmin are kind of revealing of your perspective. The holding hands thing, I joked about that a couple times, but that is a legitimate thing. There have been there's a history of strange lingering touches that have been from the beginning, and partly I think it's just because that's the way that camaraderie builds on this sort of TV show, where there's a lot of running around, literally running in straight lines and trying to follow cues and blocking. Of course, the actors are going to physically be very in tune with one another, but still, there's a lot of things that over time have had to go back to the cursed episode, Can You Hear Me? Remember, Yaz's subplot in that is that she runs away because she's depressed about something that's never really clarified, I don't believe. And it's some sort of teenage angst that is resolved by, of course, her meeting with a cop. And, her meeting with an older woman and having, a moment of, seeing one another across time and society or whatever. I think this has been a long time coming, and I'm very happy that it's here. And that being said, now that it's official, I'm afraid I do have to switch over to I can't support it anymore because Chris Chibnall's involved now, and if it's on purpose, then it's bad.
It's the monkey's paw, isn't it?
Yes, the entire time I've been thinking the only reason this is so good is because there's the guy who's supposedly in charge has no idea that it's going on. That made it more honest in its own way.
I agree that there have been things throughout, the series, especially that Can You Hear Me, that looking at it from that lens, it's something that would be very relatable. Because I think when you're engaging with media, people always do this. They look for things they can relate to, and if that thing is not necessarily explicitly there, they will nonetheless find things that, even if not intended as that specific sort of, I guess, life event, people will go, well, even though this wasn't meant to be that, it still feels something that I can understand. Therefore, they will apply their own life experiences onto it. And I've done this with characters before, and you know, in the sense that that I will notice things with characters that I'm like, well, I know that it wasn't intended as this reading, however I can relate to it in this context, therefore I will choose for this to be my own personal reading. So what I mean by this is that I am of the opinion that Thasmin was not an intentional and conscious thing until towards this latter end of things. That it was when fans were seeing things and what they were seeing was something that they were applying from their own experiences but was not necessarily intended in the text, which is completely valid, I must say. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. However, they were applying. So when I've done similarly and I've seen a character that I feel I can relate to, there is an awareness that it's not done intentionally, that this character wasn't written with that interpretation in mind. So I acknowledge the fact I don't praise a writer for writing this interpretation if I know that they didn't mean to. But what happened with Thasmin is that people saw and this is my own personal opinion based on what little we know. We will never be privy to the conversations that have happened over these years, and whether this was something that they did intentionally put in. Mandip's comments seem to suggest that it wasn't something they really were thinking of, at least not initially. So that's all we can go off of. So, and based off what I can see in the episodes, I don't think there was any intentionality in that. So what happened was people saw things that they could relate to and they applied their own sort of life experiences onto it, and this is what sort of created Thasmin as what it became in the fandom.
Yeah.
But where this became interesting is that people started praising Chibnall for this and suggesting that he put all of this stuff in unintentionally for this specific reading. And I disagree with that. I do not think that, simply for the fact that these things that were being credited as, or some of them anyway, I do agree that there's some that have a more obvious romantic reading to it, that I would say that, you know, as Neil mentioned, like the conversation between Yaz and Captain Jack, that has more of a sort of romantic angle to it, especially considering we know how Jack felt about the Doctor, for example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You too, huh? As he said to Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely, there are 100% sort of like conversations and moments that I do think had that reading as intentional. Some of the earlier stuff, I would hesitate to say that was intentional, just because looking at the sort of timeline of Mandip's comments, they don't seem to line up with the idea that it was always there from the start. However, I do think that, especially in response to the fandom, you know, reacting to things, and this interpretation of the fandom has sort of supported, then it has been incorporated over time until we reach this point where it is now unequivocal, undeniable text. But it's this, like, so that's sort of thing in Can You Hear Me? I think now, retroactively, that is absolutely the most obvious sort of like the source for essentially Yaz's angst, I guess. And then like the it makes sense now. It makes, you know, obviously there's a lot of reasons that could have manifested, and sort of, you know, and how she felt, but I think now retroactively it makes more sense. However, can I say definitively that scene was written with that interpretation of Yaz in mind? No, I can't. So I would hesitate to sort of like praise Chibnall from that perspective. You know, it's this tough thing that I'm having, that I've never been against Thasmin. I in fact am all for it, and
yeah,
I just struggled to see it very, very early on. Not in the sense that I couldn't understand why people would interpret it in that way, but more along the lines of I couldn't see this intentionality that people were saying was there. Like so whereas now, like as time went on, I can see it, you know, I could see it sort of progressively get more obvious, but I was still unsure if it would ever amount to anything, which is why this so when Eva the Daleks was sort of being talked about, the whole rom-com thing and everything, you saw a lot of talk in fandom about people who were very certain that this episode would culminate in something having, you know, some sort of significant Thasmin moment in it. And I was sceptical, not because I didn't want it to happen, but specifically because I wasn't sure I trusted Chibnall to deliver anything, because I wasn't sure that there was any intentionality up to that point that this was a thing. So it's this really tough thing that I'm not sitting here going like that, oh, the Thasmins have been right all along, or like the Thasmin shippers have been right all along, and to be clear, I'm not saying that in a sort of disparaging way. I don't think anything they've been doing is like wrong or incorrect, but on the same note, I think there was a lot of reading into what Chibnall was writing that he didn't intend, and it's okay, we're feasting either way. Yeah, we are feasting either way. Like, I'm happy that it's amounted to this, but on the same note, I have this conflict that it's like, it's the third to last episode of the era.
He's only introducing it now to create the tension over whether she survives the next 2 episodes.
I think you're raising a lot of rich and really complicated ideas there. I think bringing up Can You Hear Me helps us unlock them a bit. So with Can You Hear Me, the stuff with Yaz, some people are very intuitively, very easily, very immediately read as, oh, this is a suicidality thing. This is obviously a suicidality thing. And to some people, that was really obvious. And to some people, they were, what? You know, and some people, oh, wow, I didn't think of it that way. It makes sense. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But the thing is, to some people, that felt obvious. But there was never explicit dialogue in the episode saying that, and therefore there's the ambiguity that blossoms out into fandom, especially as, like we're saying, Chibnall often has a kind of avoidant storytelling style. The Timeless Children is set up once in series 11 by some talking rags, and then it's a huge deal in series 12. This is the type of storyteller he is for his era of Doctor Who, is this kind of errant setup, if you want to call it that. So with Can You Hear Me, because it's not super explicit in dialogue, we can get some fans finding something really obvious and some fans never thinking of it and then thinking they agree with it or they don't agree with it. Most of the Yaz having a crush on the Doctor stuff, I think, falls into that same category where it's very obvious to some people that think it's clear or that want to think it, like me. Like, to me, the Diodati thing, like, oh, of course that means that. But it's not explicitly Yaz saying, you know what, I've got a big old crush on the Doctor. And so there would be
no point to that. It would be a less interesting story if it was, you know, Martha. Let's be real. That's what we're talking about. This is the ghost that's haunting Thasmin, is Martha.
All that said, you know, even Survivors of the Flux, there's an ambiguity. Like, she's mooning over the hologram of the Doctor, but that could be read different ways. It could be her, like, thinking, man, I wish the Doctor could take me back to my family, back to my home. You know, I'm pinning all my hopes of normalcy back on her. There's other ways you could read that. I wouldn't read them that way, but there's other ways you can read that. However, in my opinion, the first episode to raise the idea of Yaz having a crush on the Doctor, Arachnids, I think this isn't a Can You Hear Me situation. I think this is a bit of an explicit situation, because the idea of Yaz and the Doctor dating is raised explicitly in dialogue. And yes, it's shot down, but it is actually raised. This is an idea actually proposed by the episode. And then I know a lot of people will say this is probably just a throwaway gag, you know, not something that's going to evolve into anything. However, my pushback to that would be, and now we're getting into the ambiguous zone, and I understand that this isn't a scene like that's the first Arachnid scene, which explicitly raises the idea of a romantic possibility. It shoots it down, but it does actually for real raise it. It's actual objective dialogue we can talk about. The end is a more subjective interpretive thing, but to me, this isn't necessarily the way it was scripted. But Yasmin has these lines, I want more of the universe, more time with you, you're like the best person I've ever met. Those are the scripted lines. And then Ryan and Graham say similar stuff, which you could see is deflating the meaning I'm about to read into this. But Mandip is beaming up at the Doctor at this moment. And I know Mandip, like Astra pointed out, and like I read out, you know, wasn't on the Thasmin train back in 2018, 2019. But the performance there, she's beaming at the Doctor, and the Doctor is looking softly back. And I think the way the director chose to shoot those moments and the takes she chose to have used, that director, I think that constitutes a kind of double whammy. This one episode kickstarted Thasmin, I think, not just because of the first scene, but because of the two scenes. It's the setup and the payoff.
Yeah.
Not often we get this in this era, but it was a double whammy beat. The first beat, the possibility of Thasmin explicitly raised by the mum, is shot down. And then the episode ends with Yaz saying these very kind of obsessive lines with the Doctor and just positively glowing up at her.
You're the best person.
Yeah, you're the best person I've ever met. All the fan vids I've watched use that scene, and I've watched so many of them over the years because I like this shit.
Like, when that happened, there was no doubt for me that that's where it was going.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Big double whammy.
So I want to clarify why I was very hesitant to believe there was anything intentional. And this comes specifically from my own perspective, and I don't know how much you guys have sort of engaged with this side of fandom. I am very heavily into the side of fandom that engages with shipping.
Yeah.
I always have been. I have been for years. I have watched so many series, okay, where my primary form of engagement with fandom is shipping. Which is a very common thing. So the reason I wasn't positive about it, the reason I wasn't optimistic, and why now, even now, I struggle to believe that it was always intentional, is because I tend not to trust writers with it, because I have been burned so many times before, that I invested in something, I felt the story was heading towards that way, without a shadow of a doubt. And then it never happened. I'm talking about a lot of shows. So this happened a lot, and in fact, so here's a really relevant one, because we've been discussing Moffat. Sherlock had so much content. Like, okay, I'm not going to go into it deeply because I know Neo hasn't watched it, but Sherlock...
Yeah, it's actually really disruptive to have Neo here, because he's actively making this part of the conversation more difficult to have.
Right,
Because when you say Sherlock, we all know what you mean.
Yes, yeah. Everyone knows what I mean, and you'll also know what I mean, because I do credit Sherlock absolutely with some of the absolute animosity that people have towards Moffat nowadays, because Sherlock...
Wow.
No, absolutely. See, when you watch it, you will understand, and
yeah,
certainly
for sure.
if you were there in the fandom at the time, no, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, this was the trouble with Sherlock, and I think this is the reason why people, and especially fandom, as in, like, current fandom who tend to engage in the shipping side of fandom, or the shipping side of things, they hate Moffat. And they hate Moffat specifically because Sherlock had this glaring issue. And it was, when you watch it, Neil, you will see it. It is overt, it is obvious, it is in your face. It is in your face. So
interesting. So
when that didn't amount to anything, spectacularly didn't amount to anything. Sorry, Neil, but I'm sure you're aware that it doesn't amount to anything. Like, that's not really a spoiler.
My ears are closed. I'm holding my hands over my ears.
It shouldn't shock you though that it doesn't, because you'd know about it if it did.
But Martin and Benedict seem so close in real life.
But so Sherlock was for very many people, it was a sort of a breaking of trust almost, and shows had done this before, to be clear, like this idea of like baiting, it had happened before, but Sherlock, for a lot of people, especially for my generation, this sort of fandom generation, so to speak,
compare with like the X-Files shippers, who have exactly the same thing going on, going back a generation before, or the Moonlighters, or the Kirk Spockers.
Shipping and fandom always has this air to it that's, for many years there was, and by shipping I don't just mean, I mean specifically like gay ships, because when you're talking about sort of like a will they won't they thing with sort of 9 times out of 10, if you've got a will they won't they situation with a sort of a male character and a female character, they're going to get together, okay? There's some exceptions to this, but specifically when if it's 2 female characters, 2 male characters, it is doubtful whether anything will happen. And so many situations, so many shows have occurred where there is stuff there that you would say, and far more than Thasmin ever had, and it never amounts to anything. Okay, so this is the issue I have. This is the perspective I was approaching it from. I was not optimistic about it because I've seen this play out so many times before. Then you've got shows very, very recent where there's all these moments in so many moments over so many years, and you know what, it does culminate in something happening where one side does admit they have feelings for the other, and then they die. So even now with Thasmin, I am hesitant
because we've got 2 episodes left.
Yeah, well, like
including a companion departure, one way or the other.
So when it comes to Thasmin, I didn't feel any optimism that any of these hints, which, to be clear, compared to other shows I have watched that were baiting, Thasmin is nothing. Like I'm like, I've got to be very brutally honest. The hints that Thasmin had were nothing compared to other shows that I've watched that turned out to be directly just bait. That's all. So I didn't invest in Thasmin because I didn't believe that it would ever happen.
Didn't want to get stung again.
Yeah, because that's what I was expecting. I was expecting that if I did get invested in this, which I've also got to be brutally honest, I don't think there's much depth in Chibnall's era of Doctor Who in the first place for me to get invested in. But I wasn't even willing to hope that they would get an on-screen textual queer romance and sort of Chibnall era of Doctor Who, between the Doctor and a companion. I wasn't willing to hope because my experience with shipping things in other fandoms, it always ended badly. So I didn't want to invest, and I wasn't willing to invest, and then so we've got this sort of, it is now textual, but now the question is, will it be reciprocated? Because I don't. So
no, I love that perspective, Astra. I think that's really, really interesting. I love the contextual stuff you bring into that, especially because we were talking about like added context earlier onto these kinds of things. I think that's really valuable, especially that stuff about expectations being set up by like genre shows over time, like by Sherlock and stuff. I think that's really interesting. For me, when I talk about Thasmin, maybe I shouldn't even be using this term, because I think the way this term is used is meaning different things when different people talk about it. Like when I talk about the arachnid scene with some people, I'll get like this pushback of, hey, but they didn't do anything with it in series 12. And you're dreaming if you think Chibnall's going to do, you know, a LGBT romance in his final episodes. This is all putting stuff that like I might not have been talking about. Like when I talk about that as arachnid scenes, I'm talking about those arachnid scenes in kind of a vacuum, you know, before Saranga aired and before all the rest aired. I'm interested in what those scenes signified in the moment and how that kick-started fandom making the fan videos and whatnot.
Yeah.
When I, like, say Thasmin, I never thought of the Doctor reciprocating. Like, that was never, that's never been anything I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of, like, Series 3, Martha having a crush on Tennant and that being, like, a character beat or a character journey of its own. You know, that's more, and that's not even necessarily what I'm envisioning, but what I'm trying to get at here is I think there are different ideas people have when we think of this concept of, you know, Yaz might have had a crush on the Doctor. Yaz might have a crush on the Doctor. And even that's not agreed upon by fandom. But when we can agree to that level, then there is still all these different takes to be had. You know, some people might think, well, I would like, you know, this to develop in a certain way. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to develop in this way. I think it's going to develop in this way. I don't think it's going to develop. I'm just interested in how the scene evolved at the moment. Do you know what I mean? By that kind of thing?
No, I understand completely, and I agree. So for example, all the examples you brought up, all the scenes you brought up, I fully agree with you that they do set up this possibility and suggest, you know, this reading, and I would say that is also one of the most obvious readings, you know, for a lot of those scenes. So I'm in complete agreement with you. Where Thasmin becomes a complicated and difficult topic for me is that I think if Chibnall is, and this is a matter of opinion, but I think if Chibnall is going to put this stuff in, if he's going to set up this possibility, he damn well better deliver.
Yeah.
Because I think so this is what I mean, right? I always believed that there was this possibility in the sense that there was things there that suggested Thasmin, that supported that reading. I never believed that it was an invalid reading. I think that as you're saying, like the line in Arachnids completely set up this possibility. It put that out there, threw it out, you know, and let people think what they, you know, wanted to think about it. It textually brought up the idea of the Doctor and Yasmin in a relationship, even though it was shot down. But then, as you said, it later then got sort of there was a sort of payoff of you know, at the end of the episode. So I fully believe that this stuff was always there. Where, from my perspective though, I always felt that it was not worth investing in.
Yeah.
And it was wrong of Chibnall to put this stuff in there if he never intended to deliver on it. Which, okay, obviously, so far we've got a one-sided, you know, sort of, you know, it's made textual now. It's sort of like, if that had never happened, if Yasmin had never had this confession of feelings, then I think because the Thasmin moments that were there, they weren't as strong as I've seen in other other genre shows that turned out to be absolute baiting. Mm-hmm. But they were still undeniably there. So, but I still think it would be irresponsible for Chibnall to put that out there and then not deliver on it.
That's the word.
I think, yeah, it's like, why would you set your fandom up? Your fandom who because let's be honest, the Doctor Who fandom does have a significant amount of like sort of young LGBT people in it, especially.
Very much.
So I think like this is very heavy, but it's almost cruel to put that sort of out there and then not delivering it.
Exactly.
However, he's delivered like that one-sidedness. My issue now is that I still think it is wrong of him to not deliver on it and have it be reciprocated, because at that point, why was it ever brought up in the first place if it is just going to result in heartbreak for Yaz?
Well, because that's interesting, because that's fun, because
it's fun.
You know, stories of unrequited love are always the best, I believe was once phrased.
I know, I agree with that. So this is the issue I have. Okay, I agree that stories of unrequited love are interesting. Okay, I do fully agree, and I think there's a place for that. I think there's a place for unrequited love of all, you know, sort of like types. I fully agree with that, but my issue is that is normal. So in genre shows and shows in general, we have this issue because when you start bringing in this idea of LGBT representation, it is the baseline that it either doesn't get delivered upon, or if it does, it gets delivered on. They die. It's never resolved. It's unrequited, etc., etc. There's some aspect of it that it is not a happy ending. Like, I know that this era has to end with 13 regenerating, so there is always going to be an aspect of it that it is not a happy ending because 13 has to regenerate and Yas has to leave, which is why I have an issue with it being left to the end. But my issue with it is that if you can soften that blow. No, this is why I'm so stressed out by it.
Meta Crisis 13.
Like, Meta Crisis 13 would work, but
what if Yaz gets a 13?
This is what I'm so stressed out about it though, because Chibnall leaving it to the end in the way he has meant that even if he does make it requited, and therefore theoretically it is a happy moment for 13 and Yaz, it always has to end potentially in tragedy in some way, unless he does introduce something like a Meta Crisis 13. So this is what I'm struggling with. It's like, on one hand, I'm happy that Thasmin is now textual. I'm worried about whether or not it'll be requited, because I think it would be wrong of Chibnall to introduce this without making it requited. But then also, I think it's wrong for him to have introduced it so late in the game and guaranteeing that we're never going to get to see the full extent of a relationship if one develops. And it's going to end in some way in tragedy. Like
even a 24 years Deryllium moment means that all their time together happens off screen. Like, that's still not good.
We don't see.
It's irresponsible. It's just my point. It's just so irresponsible the way he's handled it.
There's no version of this that turns into a good queer storyline. That's the simple fact. You cannot wait to episode 29 of 31. It is too late. Too little, too late. Like, I feel bad for people who, like, wanted to imagine that Yaz and 13 were in a relationship this whole time, because now we've just had it confirmed that Yaz has not even admitted to herself that she likes the Doctor, let alone to the Doctor. Like, it's just all of that fan on, all of those nice shipping fan vids just scrapped out out the window. We're 2 episodes left. Yaz has not even confessed to the Doctor. There is just no way that this ends well. Even if it's a happy ending, it's still going to be rushed and shitty, and it just sucks. Like, we can talk about intentionality till the cows come home, but the simple fact of it is, like, regardless of whether Chibnall intended this or didn't intend that, we have gone 29 episodes, and oh god, I'm choking on my own spit here, you know.
I prefer to think that it wasn't intentional from the start, because if it was intentional, that means he left it to the end when we're in this situation, and he did that knowingly. So I prefer to think that it was never intended. That's why I choose to believe that it was never intended.
What you just said, Esther, you just reminded me that we were first introduced to Yaz and her possible crush on the Doctor in 2018, and there's absolutely never been any guarantee that any of the companions would stay past, 1 season. The fact that she is, through a bizarre turn of events, the longest running companion is astonishing, and it's on the one hand, you could very uncharitably say, well, they didn't have anything else for her to do for the 3rd season in a row, so might as well give her some kind of storyline finally after 4 years.
Where I think all this coalesces for me is, I think it was Gig earlier who cut to the core of this by calling it high stakes. Was it you that said that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's the issue is, if this was a straight relationship, if this was something like Martha, I think all of us, not just us 5, but the fandom in general, would be more open to ways the story could be told and ways the stories could end. Because, apart from just like the obvious societal, differences in that, it's also a story that's been told before on Doctor Who. We've had companions having crushes on the Doctor before, and we've both had it requited and we've had it not requited. It's a story that's been told. It's a story the show can tell comfortably, and people wouldn't be surprised by it telling. Certainly not in the revival. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. When it's a story between 2 women, the stakes are higher. And so I think we are deservedly less...
charitable?
Less forgiving, I think.
Less forgiving, exactly. Yeah, rightfully so. Because it's a higher stakes round. This representation means... the representation or lack of representation, or how this representation will unfold, tangibly means something to people in a way that a companion having a crush on the Doctor again might not mean if it was Dan or Graham, which, yeah, forget that.
And it's going to be really weird when, in just a couple of years in Russell T Davies' first episode, when his Doctor is making out with her companion.
Mm-hmm. I think people have this vision as well. I think people have this kind of, it's this folk memory idea we have again of like there being lots of gay companions or something. Go through the list. Rose only ever presented as straight. Mickey only ever presented as straight. Jack, pan. Yep. And, looked like some kind of crush on the Doctor, and we get that explored a bit.
Half companion.
Martha, straight. Donna, straight. Amy, straight. Rory, straight. River, bi, but in a way that it's very easily missed. Mm-hmm. Who's next? Clara, bi.
Clara, the same.
But, yeah, and not in a very foregrounded way.
Never has an actual queer romance.
Nardole, only ever presented as straight. Bill, yes, gay. Excellent. That's 1. Mm-hmm. Then we move on. Graham, only presented as straight. Ryan, only presented as straight. Dan, only presented as straight. Yaz, arguable enough that we've been arguing about it for years and years. And whatever arguments we make, whether they're good or bad, the fact that there is so much argument about it speaks volumes in itself. No one was arguing about Bill, whether she was gay or not. That was loud and proud representation. And you can like or dislike how it was done, but it wasn't like an argument of ambiguity.
Like, that was like fridging, but super sci-fi fridging.
So that's the problem for me is we could talk about the books, that 99% of people haven't read.
Yeah.
Precedent in the books, I think Astro can back me up, for some type of like gay crush or some kind of relationship thing between a Doctor and a companion being suggested or explored in some way, right?
Yes.
But most people haven't explored that. And again, that's 1. You know what I mean? So it's a high stakes round here.
In terms of intentionality, which we were talking about, I think it's an interesting comparison with stuff like The Division last series or The Timeless Child, the series before, where maybe it's just a mode of Chibnall's writing that you don't develop stuff, you tease it and tease it and tease it and then do a big reveal.
Yeah, I completely agree.
There's a similarity to that here, where instead of developing feelings over a set of series, you just drop some hints and then do a reveal and that's it.
I don't mean this as a joke at all. I think that's why I brought up the rags earlier and how we get one mention of the Series 12 arc in Series 11 and then it's a big deal in Series 12. I genuinely think this is probably like a big mode of Chibnall storytelling in his era, which complicates stuff so much because, like, for me, I think about it and I think, yeah, that sounds pretty Chibnall to, you know, throw a ball up in the air in 2018 and then poke it again, you know, 3-4 years later. That, I think that fits his kind of storytelling. But is this the appropriate vehicle for that sort of storytelling, to not interrogate Yaz or not explore her interiority in this regard in any meaningful sense, or only in senses that we argue about whether they happened at all for all these years, and then bring that ball back down when now there's only 2 episodes left? Like, I think that kind of fits how he tells stories this era. I don't think that's good.
Yeah.
See, it's fucking hilarious that some people are like, well, this is a perfectly valid story about a closeted queer woman. You know, closeted people are valid too. Just like Bill was out and proud, Yaz in the closet. This is perfectly valid. This is good. It's been there the whole time. It's been deep. It's layered. The thing is, it's hilarious because we had Can You Hear Me, which was an episode that actually did explore Yaz's interiority. Perfect example of how you can explore a character's interiority without them talking about their feelings directly to other people. You know, and if you were doing a long story, a slow burn story about a closeted queer person, then that might be a way you explore their queerness at some point, you know, earlier than their third to last episode. So that's the thing. Like, you can't really consider this a long, well executed slow burn story about someone who's been struggling with closeted, you know, queerness, because
it's not.
Because it's just not that. You know, Chibnall has not used point of view.
And what else has Yaz been doing anyway?
Exactly.
Yeah, you know.
Exactly. Why could this not have been her plot in
Can You Hear Me?
Series 11.
Battle of Ranskor Avkolos?
Oh, yeah, sure, that too.
On what Gig just said, does anyone mind if I steal one of Neo's tricks and very quickly go through a list of defenses I've seen?
I love it. Go for it.
Oh, yes, please.
Because it's a classic Neo move. Okay, so I think this is too late. I think flatline, this is just too late. I don't think there's a way out. I'm open to being proved wrong, but I think this is just too late. And this is some of the arguments against that I've seen. One of them was that this is a coming out story. It's about someone who's been in the closet. Is it, though?
That's arguable. It's ambiguous.
They're literally in a closet most of the episode.
The audience didn't know. We actually didn't know until this week. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think you can do sexuality as a reveal, but it's a complex thing that you need to play very carefully, and 3 episodes from the end, it's just too late. The other thing is the idea that Yaz didn't yet know, and so how could the show have explored it when Yaz didn't know yet? Well, she's fictional.
She's not real.
She was written to not know yet.
She's real
Someone
to
made
me.
that choice. That this is a sort of retroactive representation, and now the last 3 series have a major queer character in them. But it's technically true, but it doesn't make them queer stories.
J.K. Rowling.
They have the Doctor, who is a queer character.
Yeah, Harry Potter's always been brilliant queer rep because Dumbledore was always in it. There's still time to go.
Ooh,
Is there hell?
There's big finish to come.
There's still the big finish it. Hey, who knows? Maybe she'll come back. It'll be RTD's fault for not carrying on the story. It takes a long time in real life to realize these things about yourself. Again, that's true.
It's not real life.
But this isn't real life.
Skip 3 years off screen.
Yeah, it can very easily take 3 years to figure yourself out, but you need to explore that while it's happening. And my final and absolute favourite defence I've seen is that this happening disappointingly late in the run reflects the disappointments in real life's rich tapestry.
The RTD defense. It's what he said about. It's what he said about Children of Earth. Rest in peace. There's not going to be a Yaz shrine.
That idea that they're putting forward, the idea of like portraying like how life can be disappointing, you can write good stories that explore that idea, you know. So it's like,
Yeah.
I want that to be his explanation, you know, in Doctor Who magazine next year for why he waited until the last 45 minutes of the character's tenure on the program.
Real life is homophobic.
It's true.
It reminds me of in our Flux finale discussion when we were talking about how there's this kind of attitude that these scraps are a 3-course meal. You know, it also ties into that insular Doctor Who fandom thing, I think, where it's like there is more than this out there. There are some, and it feels so ridiculous and patronizing to say this, but I think the discourse merits it. There is incredible lesbian storytelling out there. There is amazing representation out there. You know, there are fantastic stories, I guess, with somewhat similar characters out there. They're not this. This was scraps over years. I'm not arguing the scraps don't exist. I argue more than most people that the scraps very much did exist. That's what I was arguing earlier. But they're still scraps. There's still like 1 or 2 things a series. Like this isn't representation in the kind of way that I think brings out soulful championing. Like I see, you know, really fantastic gay storytelling doing. So even if you argue more to the perspective of this stuff was there, was it done well? Was it done a lot?
I think it's also important to point out, and you're absolutely correct, there are other stories out there that handle, you know, storylines like this with just better in every sort of way. But the reality also is that, and the reason why it is so bad and, as I said before, irresponsible that Chibnall has written what he has written, is that as much as there are stories out there with good LGBT representation, they are not the norm. They're not in mainstream media usually. Obviously there are some exceptions, but there's not that many of them. So the reason I say that what Chibnall has done is irresponsible is the fact that he had this opportunity to contribute positively to sort of
society.
That's a great point, yeah.
With Doctor Who.
But contribute positively to we lack a lot of stories, and especially in shows like Doctor Who. I mean, I cannot think off the top of my head, there's not that many sort of shows with sort of positive lesbian relationships in the mainstream media, specifically family shows. I really just can't recall.
That's a great point, yeah. I can think of examples, but not ones that kids are going to be watching like at 7 p.m, yeah.
And even when they do exist, not to the level of popularity that Doctor Who has, and not to the level of cultural relevance that Doctor Who has or has had over the years. So the reason it's specifically irresponsible is not just the idea that he's missed the mark, but specifically he's missed the mark on something that should be so important. And I just feel it's...
We're not crazy for expecting it either, because remember that Stevens quote from before Series 11?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you shouldn't build up expectations if you're not going to deliver it. And the thing is, Chibnall has delivered so far 50%, but as we've clarified, even if it becomes a requited sort of romance, it doesn't matter, because it's too little too late, and it's never going to sort of end in a truly satisfying way, or in a way that is fully like witnessed on screen, even if there is a happy ending of some sort.
Yeah, like you were saying, this is a show that's important and special, even if it's not as good as it used to be, or not as important as it used to be, and not as special as it used to be. It's a major cultural institution, and to have, you know, what you put on there matters.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, that's a really good point. The thing here is, all of us, I think, are basically agreed on thinking, you know, you could do a cool story with Yaz being in love with the Doctor. You could do great representation with that. We like the idea of doing a story this way, but we don't think that story is really being told much over the era, and there's so little time to tell it now that it's, you know, to play with these high stakes things in this sort of way is irresponsible, like Astra said, or at the very least, it's not great storytelling. I think we're all basically agreed on that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to other fans, like I think Astra was bringing up, I think there's this disconnect. There can be this disconnect with some fans where it's like, we're like on their side, basically.
Oh yeah, we're just talking about Thasmin on this show, not Thasmin in that is in people's hearts, which is good and proper and has always been here.
But all of us are wanting more, basically. And I think some people get frustrated. They're like, why are you bringing the vibes down? We've just gotten it confirmed. You know, who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 episodes? This could be amazing.
I am one of these fans because earlier, I joked earlier, but I'm also now realizing that I'm entirely serious, that I no longer really support the pairing, like the relationship, like
it's not an audience thing anymore
as much as I did. Yeah, now that it's been taken over now that Chris Chibnall is getting his hands on it.
He's telling the story, not the fans. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think the disconnect is like, I really think a lot of people that might not agree with our sort of perspective on this, the kind of downer perspective, I really think we're in more agreement than we're in disagreement with in a lot of ways. I think we all want this story to be told, and we want it to be told well. But, you know, how many episodes over 24 episodes have aired by now? The amount of scenes exploring this are absolutely tiny. The ones exploring it explicitly are even tinier. The next 2 episodes, even if we're charitable and, you know, say this makes its way in a big way into the next 2 episodes, that's still so little time. And this is in the very last year, the last few months. Just structurally, there's not, I think, a really responsible or super positive way to tell the story. And like Astrid brings up, this isn't even necessarily a story that's going to end in a way that's going to feel particularly affirming to a lot of people. So I think there's actually a lot of unity in the fandom over, you know, wanting Yaz to have a great story, and specifically a great story in this vein, this LGBT vein. But I just think the actual circumstances of how this era is going to end and what time we have left, and through all the knowledge we have of Chibnall and all the episodes that have come before, the kind of assumptions we might make, incorrect or correct, about what's going to come next, lead us to feeling more disappointed than affirmed by it being confirmed, you know, that Yaz is bisexual or a lesbian and has a crush on the Doctor. Yeah.
Ultimately, I think the Thassies really want to feel like they won. You know, I saw a lot of Thassies won. Yeah, Thasmin.
Yes, we did.
Team Thasmin has won after that
Team
episode,
Thasmin
right?
has absolutely won, and it's disgusting that you're trying to imply otherwise. But keep going.
And the essence of like, and I think it's totally understandable, as for reasons we've just been talking about, like why they really want to and need to feel like they've won something, like something good has come to them. And we want that too. We all want Thasmin to win, but that's what we've always wanted. But it's like the nature of what has been won here, as we've just been going over it, it's like, well, it's like they've won like this kind of worst consolation prize possible. It's like, it's really like, it's seeing these people who are like, you don't really want to drag people down and bring down their happiness or whatever, but like when you see them of rejoicing over something that, okay, maybe I do a little bit, but when you see them rejoicing over something that is so fundamentally like little and it's going to be so unsatisfying in the long run, it's like, it's just really hard to get behind that, and just turns into, I guess, some sort of another kind of factional split between people who are rejoicing over this and us who maybe aren't.
So I just want to, this is sort of touching upon a lot of like things with regards to fandom ideas and shipping and creator validation and things like that. So you see this very commonly in fandoms. There's a lot of ships that they get popular that either don't have any support in canon, or they do have support but they never become canon, or you know, they have support and
explicitly rejected.
Yeah. So the thing about fandom is that there's this, when you're there in it, fandom feels like the biggest thing for any show, for any sort of media. You know, you're part of fandom, you feel that every fan, every person watching the show must approach it from the same perspective as someone does as an avid fan of it. But the reality is, every single show that's out there, the vast majority of people watching it are not within the fandom, and they don't watch it from that perspective. So when you have this shipping culture within a fandom and people celebrating what there is for Thasmin, my issue is not that they're happy about it. Obviously not. I am happy for them. But my concern, and the reason I criticise the way Thasmin has been handled, is because whilst all the Thassies have won, there's all these other people who are never involved in the fandom, who only see Doctor Who for what it is on screen. They never they never witness the fan fiction, the fan art, anything like that. And for them, it is a disappointing story. I do not think for 1 second this is something that... It might be a pleasant surprise for some people that this is the direction the story is going. However, I am concerned for all the reasons we've laid out before that this cannot end in a satisfying way because it's been left so late. So for the general audience, how this has been handled is not good. The fandom may celebrate it and think it's great and love it and everything and sing its praises. And that's because they have been invested in Thasmin for years now. They're finally getting the validation that either they did believe was always going to happen or they were hopeful for but weren't sure if it ever was. So they're now in the stage where they're rejoicing, they're excited, they're happy because they are seeing all these ideas that they've had for years being validated on screen by the creator, which is good. I understand that feeling. I've had that with very few ships, but I've had that. I know how good it feels. Mm-hmm. But on the same note, what people are going to remember about Doctor Who, what the vast majority of viewers are going to remember, nothing to do with how the fandom felt about this. They're going to remember what's in the actual show. It's very, very rare that the occurrences within a fandom are going to be something that is long lasting. The one I can think of right now is in terms of fandoms and shipping in fandoms that had a huge impact, and even then it was only an impact within the context of fandom, was things like Star Trek with Kirk and Spock, right? That had a huge sort of far-reaching implications for how fandom later developed. However, the vast majority of people who are not involved in fandom will never experience these things. So in terms of how Chibnall has presented this relationship and the way he's developed it and how late he's left it, it's not good for the vast majority of viewers. It's not good for the vast majority of people, you know, who will come to watch Doctor Who in later years and never get to experience the fandom as it was when Thasmin was an active and current thing.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Really good point.
We're going to have to start haunting the fandom like the Rose 10 shippers do.
Yeah. Just never stop talking about it.
From now until the end of time, part 3, we're all going to be standing around saying, so are they going to put, Yaz and 13 in the special? Because, we haven't had any... they haven't.
They're in a parallel universe. They can still come back.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Astra knitted in two interesting elements there. One was the factionalist thing that we've been talking about, and the other is the insularity thing, which we've been talking about, where Doctor Who fans immersed in fandom can get kind of blinkered and apply out. It seems obvious to us that whatever is whatever, and that gets lost to time, especially these kind of temporally fixed aspects. But the factionalist one really interests me. Gig touched on it too, where it's almost becomes like the my team is that this is going to happen. And where I think this gets really a minefield is where that starts interfacing with intentionality. And it's like my team is that this was intended to happen. My team is that Chibnall was planning this. But I think that intent thing becomes such a factionalist thing where it's not just, audiences could read, that scene as a lesbian crush. Totally, that really appears like it. It's, this was planting a seed, and Chibnall always planned to have it bloom in his last 2 or 3 hours, 3 or 4 years later. It's interesting how it's like your prediction becomes like your faction, and that's like you start putting a lot of stock into that, and like you have arguments for years over that. It's interesting, and I feel sad I know people have different responses to the Thazies as they are, but I feel a lot of pity a lot of the time because
thank you.
I wish they were getting more. That's what I wish. I don't think they're silly because I've always read the arachnid scene in the way I was talking about, in a very shipping way. So I feel very much on their side, but I feel like Chibnall isn't the man that's going to give them what they deserve, and I think they deserve so much more than this. Even if this ends well, it's in so little time. Yeah.
No man is going to give them what they deserve. It needs a queer creator to be really accurate.
Yeah.
And so I think I felt some development between the Flux finale discussion and now on the topic of there being other great stories out there, which was very much my line then. And then I feel very sobered by the excellent point Astra brought up, which is but are there other things kids are watching at tea time? Are there other things where this institutional pull. Like I was earlier talking about how great the behemoth is of Doctor Who and that it can rise up new creatives. There's a real power to Doctor Who. It's a huge thing. You know, people can say it's watched less by some people than before, but it's still an absolute institution of a show. And so when I think quite naively, I'm thinking, well, I saw Portrait of a Lady on Fire, you know, the other day, or, you know, Wheel of Time did a really stirring lesbian romance, you know, the other day. Like when I think of that, that's all great, but
yeah, look, all the 10-year-old kids are going to be really excited about Carol. You know?
Exactly. That's my point. I mean, Booksmart is going to be watched by preteens, probably, yeah. But like when I'm thinking of The Favourite and stuff like that, this isn't the stuff on a tea time super accessibly like Doctor Who is on iPlayer and all that. So I think that's such an excellent point, and I think really evolves that point of, yeah, there are other great lesbian stories out there, and I wish people were treating themselves to them, but the people who can treat themselves to them are the adults. And a lot of the Thazzies on Twitter are adults, and a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are, you know, much younger people who, you know, Carol might not engage them, or they might not have access to Carol, even if it would engage them. I think that's such an excellent point. And this is why I'm more irked by, yes, I think there's been foundations for Thasmin. Even if it ends well, I functionally not sure it can end well, just in the sense of even if there's a happy ending, there's so little time to tell the happy ending. The Thazzies just deserve so much more, and it makes me sad to see some of these scraps being championed. And I know they could be offended by me calling them scraps, and that's cool. I'd love to read takes that are more charitable towards it than me, but to me it just feels like they deserve so much more than this.
I think the synthesis of all of this is not that, like, oh, you should just go and watch some other shows about lesbians, but that we want them to demand more from Doctor Who, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what we want.
And also, like, see the idea touching upon, like, again, what we've been discussing, the idea that Doctor Who is such an important show culturally, everything, you know, it's a household name in terms of shows, which not every show can say. But I'll put it like this. If it's not important that there be sort of this lesbian relationship in Doctor Who, if it's not important that Thasmin happen in a sort of well-developed way, if it doesn't matter whether or not Doctor Who has this representation, then it shouldn't have mattered that the Doctor became a woman. Mm-hmm. So
then what's the point of the show?
Yeah. So if representation, if this is not vital, if this is not something super important, because I fully believe it is, if people can sort of diminish it and say that, well, it doesn't matter whether it ends in a satisfying way because, you know, etc, whatever argument, then there's a lot of changes and a lot of things that happened in the show that it shouldn't have mattered that it happened, and yet it did matter to a huge amount of people. So I think that is why Thasmin matters to me as well, because it is very much a case that we should be expecting more and better. You know, that if this is going to be the first, you know, sort of potentially lesbian relationship, you know, between sort of a doctor and a companion, then we should have been expecting more, and I'm sad that we haven't gotten more. And God only knows how it's going to develop over the next 2 episodes, but as we've been saying, it's 2 episodes. You know, it could have been there from the start, and it wasn't.
You know what makes me feel insane with all the stuff you're bringing up is it was only a few years ago we had Bill. I feel like we're we had such proud representation. Yeah, it's like Bill was such a lovely character. I loved her so much, and she was introduced, you know, obviously, like, it's so bad faith to imply this. Obviously, not every lesbian story on Doctor Who has to be an open lesbian like Bill. But I feel like the storytelling there, the show was so unafraid of Bill being lesbian. And Moffat seemed so genuinely interested in it. He seemed to relate to it very easily. You know, the show is never shying away from it. Her lesbianism is such a key part of a character. But she's got all these other, you know, aspects of a character. She's a great character. There's so much to her. We could talk about her for hours. She's fantastic. Her sexuality is a big part of who she is. It's a big part of her interiority. This is part of the actual stories themselves. The stories, you know, interface her sexuality into them. It was all done so well in one series. And then we get this mess over, you know, we're arguing over, you know, the ambiguity of scenes in stray episodes. And it's like, how have we taken such a big step backward?
I understand the argument that this is particularly important because it's a relationship that possibly includes the Doctor. And yeah, for sure, that would be massive. I don't think that's going to happen, but it would be revolutionary. But Bill's relationship to the Doctor is also to do with her queerness. It's informed her sort of parental found family relationship with the Doctor is directly informed by her alienation from her adoptive mother. It all ties together. It's still a queer relationship with the Doctor. It's just not a queer relationship with the Doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's doing so much, even in the area that Yaz's thing is meant to be totally new.
It's really sad, you know, when you think of, like, you mentioned found family and the idea that a queer person can be on the TARDIS and be open and free with the Doctor in a really lovely way. It's so sad to think of poor Yaz in the closet on the TARDIS for all these years. It's just so depressing.
Even in the episode, you've got Dan pointing out the fact that the Doctor is aware of Yaz's feelings but pretends not to be. So the fact that Yaz has been in the closet and has felt uncomfortable with these feelings, and felt uncomfortable with being open about these feelings, and the idea is she feels that the Doctor is aware that she has these feelings and deliberately ignores them, therefore deliberately ensuring that Yaz can never be open and true to herself. Like, something about that is just uncomfortable to me and sad.
Doctor's a dickhead.
And it's sad because it comes directly off of 12 being so good with Bill, obviously, and them having that good family dynamic and him being so supportive, etc. So it's just, I don't know, it's just depressing almost.
Since we've been catching up on the Asman part of Thasmin a lot, the part needs coverage as well. The most charitable interpretation of 13 and Dan's conversation is very... I can't even imagine what a charitable interpretation of it is, because what I see is like a return to a very tiresome sort of interpretation of the Doctor, going back to 10 and 11 were both really heavily into it, Tennant and Smith, that the Doctor is the dashing romantic figure who sweeps people off their feet and knows of it and revels in it, and is essentially that the implication that Dan raises is that 13 knows that Yaz is in love with her and is just keeping her around because she likes that. Because she certainly doesn't seem to like Yaz. Yeah. If we go by the dialogue they have every episode.
The way I interpreted that scene, for me, and this is a more optimistic, I guess, is that I feel like there's some angle that Chibnall could take with it, is in the sense that the way I view that this being reciprocated is the Doctor and Yaz potentially having a discussion where the Doctor says, and again this is very optimistic, but the Doctor essentially says that she feels the same way, but her hesitance and the reason that she's never acknowledged it is that she feels that she might be a dangerous person to get involved with in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think could be a very valid way. I still think that'd be quite almost funny, because it's like Yaz is with her and involved in that danger regardless of whether or not they're together romantically. However, I could see that that's a possible reason. So when Dan acknowledged the fact that the Doctor was ignoring Yaz's feelings and pretending she doesn't know, for me that read more in the sense of the Doctor might even feel the same way, but she can't. She doesn't. She's concerned of maybe her influence or something. She
has a bad track record.
Yeah, that for me that read more as insecurity on the Doctor's part, and that was reinforced by the end with the air quotes fireworks. When she looked over at Yaz and she had that look that was very traditional romantic pining look, but then it sort of changed to her looking almost upset and concerned. So for me, I think it's. I think that right now it's headed in the direction that I think the Doctor feels the same way, but she has internal conflict that means that she can't, that she feels that there's some reason she can't reciprocate. I don't know how this is going to be resolved in a satisfying way that will have some sort of like, you know, happy air quote ending. But I feel like people will still feel validated if it's the idea that, oh, the Doctor's also felt this way the whole time, etc, etc. But then again, we return to the question of, if that is the storyline Chibnall chooses to go with, that in reality they've been pining for each other this whole time, why not just have it happen earlier so that we could have something, you know, like, so, which, and I think there's something compelling. I like the idea that maybe they've been pining for each other, but I feel like, yeah, if there was another series after this as well, where they were still together and like they resolve, like it turns out they've been pining for each other, they have this heart-to-heart conversation.
If this was happening back in Takes You Away,
then do you know what, I think that would be really good and I would really, really enjoy that. The reason it makes me sad is knowing that no matter what happens or what discussion they have or whatever culminates, 13 still has to effectively die and Yaz still has to leave. So yeah.
For me, it comes back to that high stakes thing, and also this isn't contextless. It's not like a vacuum where you can tell any sort of story about Yaz and the Doctor, and that's cool. We have all the room for that. You know, it's not like how
there's not space for all.
Yeah, it's not like how there's been so many straight Doctor companion crushes that there's a lot of freedom to do it, because there's not a real. If you do one that's quite pitiable for the straight companion straightly crushing on the straight Doctor, that's. No one's losing from that. That's not really negatively affecting anyone, you know. That's because there's all you
not anymore.
You can go watch other, but yeah, there's the history of it, and also there's so many other shows for this sort of audience doing it that it's not a big deal how you want to play a straight crush from companion to Doctor. There's a lot of room for that. But with Yaz, like in a vacuum, I think it could be interesting that this character has been introduced. Her first scene is her using her emotional intelligence as a cop, you know, diffusing the parking dispute thing. And she wants more, you know, she wants more of the universe. She wants to go higher up in a job. She's very ambitious. This is how she's introduced. And then it reads to me, and I don't know, intentionality is whatever, you know, but it reads to me like a kind of tragedy how things proceed from there. She gets increasingly obsessed with this woman that seems to ignore her in a lot of ways, and there's particularly in the romance and in other ways too. She's often rebuked by this woman in ways that increasingly feel cruel and uncomfortable to me. And so this person who started off as very ambitious seems to get less and less ambitious and just care about this woman she's pining over who doesn't seem to be returning it at all.
It's like my friend Vicky.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad story if that's the story being told in a vacuum, you know. But in this franchise, for this audience, and with this lack of history with this sort of story, it really raises my hackles, you know. And it's like some people say, well, you know, you're forcing stories to be whatever. I'm not. And I agree that a tragedy of a person becoming obsessed with this like supernatural figure and losing their ambition to that, I agree that could be a really compelling tragedy in some franchises. But in this specific one, it feels, irresponsible to me, like Astra said earlier, if that's even the story being told.
I think it's also frustrating that with the last few Doctors, like 9, 10, 11, even 12 a little bit, like there was not that much hesitancy about writing them as engaging with romantic feelings in some way. Like obviously 9 and 10, very forthright about that. You know, 12 had Husbands of River Song, just this sweeping romance, and also all that stuff in Series 8 about Clara not being his boyfriend, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we get 13, we're at this stage where the emotional intelligence has gone back so far that the Doctor is now just kind of almost in denial and just sort of like putting it off, and just that approach that Chibnall's taken to writing the Doctor just ends up just really reflecting really weirdly on the fact that it's the first woman Doctor, but she's not allowed to have this kind of I guess emotionally nuanced development like the other previous Doctors all got.
She's not allowed to have romances or really anything practically.
It's so weird to me because obviously Chibnall loves the RTD era and he patterns some of his own era after it. Huge hook of the RTD era, huge, you know, big sellable hook that people loved was the het relationships. That was, you know, such a huge part of the Series 4 finale's promotion as Rose is going to come back. It's so romantic. Why isn't he copying that stuff? Of all the stuff to copy, why is he sidelining romance?
The RTD era also has those big moments of, I couldn't possibly love you. I'm a Time Lord. Do you know what that means? And I think it's that he's aping. more than I imagine that's going to be the end note.
But we have actual scenes of that.
Yes, you don't understand. I'm a Time Lord. Yeah, which is it's the iconography and the moments from the ITD era without doing the overall story of that being wrong. And obviously it doesn't matter that you're a Time Lord. Who cares?
The sad thing is, I've been seeing a lot of people who haven't watched Doctor Who in years, who, you know, the types who gave up during Moffat's era, and I've been seeing this, and they've obviously noticed that this happened, and people have been posting clips of, you know, the Yaz, you know, admitting, and they're celebrating, they're going like, oh my god, you know, Doctor and companion, like queer romance and everything, and they're all, and I keep seeing this, and they keep going like that, oh, I'm gonna need to get caught up, and I'm sitting there like, because my trouble is, they don't know anything about Chibnall's era at all. They have not seen a single thing. This is like basically one of the aside from knowing that, you know, 13 is a woman, this is like one of the first things that they've seen from this era. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of people who go into this era expecting, first of all who don't know that this is the third episode to the end, you know, so they think that this is going to be something more than it is. But second of all, they think that this is something that has been actively developed, that is forefronted, that is, you know, actually a storyline. So I'm just sitting there thinking, my god, the amount of people who are going to be disappointed, who are going to go in and expect something more than they actually get. Alternatively, people who are going to go in and they don't have the context of us as we did watching it when it was, you know, airing for the first time. So they might, there's two options. They'll either watch it and be disappointed by how little there is, or they will watch it and they will read into certain moments.
Everything is Thasmin.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to this idea of intentionality. They're going to read into this assuming that it's all going to culminate in this, you know, that it was an intentional storyline, etc., etc. And so they're going to have a different view of it. So they won't know how we have felt, and they won't understand the frustration that fans feel about it, having watched it as it sort of aired. Because, for example, I have a lot of frustrations with it, but it was because I was watching it sort of week by week, year by year as it came out, and so, you know, we were feeling this disappointment acutely, whereas they'll be watching it, binging it, and they won't necessarily feel it in the same way. Therefore, I'm almost worried that people will build up this narrative that
it'll be okay.
Yeah, that Chibnall was this absolute genius, you know, seeding it this whole time, and in reality, how it felt for the fans, and the, you know, even as far as we can tell from you know, actor quotes, it was never meant to be what people are potentially going to perceive it as. Alternatively, as I said, they're going to watch it and be disappointed, and then I feel bad for them because that, you know, they're hoping for something a lot more than they're getting. But like I said, a lot of them just don't know that this is being thrown in at the absolute end, and, you know, 13's about to reject, you know. So it's just like, it's one of these things. It's like it looks great from the outside, but then when you're actually in it watching it, it's not quite what it seems.
I think when we get to Yaz's final episode, we'll all be united in disappointment, one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think that's obviously the most likely route.
Do you remember how Yaz was introduced as a competent, young, ambitious policewoman, and then this year she had to look down at her palm to see what would the Doctor do to know how to act in a situation?
Yeah.
I struggle to see Yaz's story as inspiring in any way, and I don't think it's narratively interesting, and I don't think it's good for this type of character as we glean her now.
Yeah, it does not feel that at any point Yaz has been empowered by her travels with the Doctor, and in fact it feels to me that she has lost some of that sort of,
yes, absolutely,
what little agency she had.
Yep.
She has lost it, and now she is so overly reliant on the Doctor and it makes me sad for her as well that, for example, in this episode, when she is finally facing up to her feelings about the Doctor, she's crying, she's not happy about it. She's not because she's you know, not because her loving the Doctor is a bad thing, but because she's had to apparently exist for so long being in love with her while the Doctor is being actively rude to her. And even in this episode, the way the Doctor just sort of dismisses her fears. So, you know, Yaz, I mean, the exact moment that leads up to Yaz's confession to Dan is Yaz yelling at the Doctor because she's terrified on the Doctor's behalf, you know, because the Doctor keeps going off by herself, and the Doctor's just going like that, I'm just trying to keep everyone safe, stay here, and then leaves.
You know what it reminds me of is this other thing in Eve of the Daleks we were talking about earlier, this like creepy entitlement thing. Like when Nick chivalrously defends Sarah, and then there's like this, well, you have to approve of, you know, what he was doing now, because look, he did this thing for you. It's like 13 protecting Yaz by not letting her in is not what Yaz wants. It is not a noble thing to do at all. It's disservicing the character. Like, I know some people are probably thinking like, well, you're being pretty hard on 13 being rude to Yaz. This is because she cares about her so much. I don't think that's a good way for the Doctor to be behaving, because it's not what Yaz wants. It's making Yaz unhappy.
It's not respecting Yaz's agency and sort of Yaz's choices, because Yaz has made it very, very clear over multiple episodes now, because there has been this conflict where Yaz has shouted at the Doctor and they've had this friction. The Doctor keeps going off by herself, and really it's been going on for a while now. The Doctor's going off by herself. Yaz is getting increasingly upset about that. And it never resolves because the Doctor never respects the fact that Yaz just wants to be let in, and it.
What type of love story is that? This complete lack of respect.
Yeah. It makes me sad on Yaz's behalf that Yaz is in love with the Doctor, and for whatever reason, the Doctor keeps shutting her out apparently with an awareness of how Yaz feels, and like. That's just heartbreaking. You
know, in the first Flux episode, when the Doctor and Yaz bounce onto the bed, and then it kind of felt like maybe a cute or a fun thing. It might be a frustrating queer-baiting thing, as you know, some of us might have thought then, but it's like a cute visual. Oh, you know, Thasmin on a bed. You know, I wonder what's being hinted at here. Even Paul Cornell tweeted to that effect. Now, that moment makes me sad. I'm thinking, wow, that must have been so hard for Yaz, you know, that for that tease, you know, she probably had a glimpse of a thought, you know, when they're on a bed. Oh, if only... You know, I wish I was close to the Doctor, but the Doctor's shutting me out, and the Doctor's doing it intentionally. I know some people, like Astro was saying, might retrospectively read the era as more affirming. To me, it's like the other way around. I'm reading things as where I used to think, oh, maybe that's a cute, wink at Thasmin. Now I'm thinking, oh, man, Yaz must have felt terribly, you know, at that moment. If we're reading the intentionality into it, that Yaz, you know, was thought of as crushing on her this whole time, then now it makes things sad.
But then we're also looking at it from the perspective of, we've been watching it this whole time and we're looking back on it now, whereas anyone who's new to the show, who's watching it for the first time, whose only knowledge of it is this Yaz's confession from this most recent episode, they're not going to watch it with the awareness that she's been closeted all this time, and, you know, etc. You know, what I mean is, they're not going to watch it with that sort of retrospective, like, oh, that is so sad. They're going to be watching everything, single thing, expecting it to build up to this eventual happy ending. Does that make sense? Like, which is why I think people could watch it now and believe it's more affirming than it actually is, because, you know, they're not looking back on it and realising the sadness of it. They'll be binge watching it and thinking all of these little moments are building up to this, you know, finale, essentially, you know.
That's why it's good to capture conversations close to the episode's airing.
Yeah.
Like we do, because this will all be temporarily, you know, lost in the future.
I've been thinking so much since Flux began, because she kept doing it in Flux. We see a lot more of the Doctor yelling at Yaz in the past year or so, haven't we?
It's sad,
Even in this episode. It's really uncomfortable.
Honestly, my head's in my hands when we were talking about how miserable Yaz's experience on the TARDIS must be at this point, and just how, just over and over, just Yaz being shot down and just treated so badly. Oh my god! And it just reminds me of that fundamental, maybe accidental misanthropy that pervades Chibnall Who. It's just, God, it's just so miserable. And I don't know if it's intentionally miserable or if it's just subconsciously miserable. I don't know if the miserableness just comes from that inherent vacuousness of Chibnall, but it always just rises to the surface. It just makes things so depressing.
It's weird that that's the main carryover from Broadchurch. Just the misery of it all. my only other thought, I think, is about the Doctor and how this is being framed as. I mean, it's being framed as a flaw on the Doctor's part. It's clear that the Doctor is in the wrong. At least we're sort of meant to feel that. But why or how or what exactly that means doesn't really follow. We were talking before about how the Doctor felt like she had learnt by the end of Flux that she's been cutting out her friends, and that in turn goes back to the Timeless Children, which in turn... Revolution, which in turn goes back to the Timeless Children, which in turn goes back to Spyfall, in which Series 11 was retroactively made about the Doctor not letting them in and telling them about her lore.
Yeah, that they don't know she's a Time Lord, and they've been traveling with her in real time, too, it seemed like.
Yeah, it's kind of been retroactively made her defining characteristic, her secretiveness. And it's not clear yet that there's, like, a point to it. But my slightly nitpicky thing is, I don't even understand what she's keeping secret now.
Yeah.
What is the actual secret? That she's going to regenerate soon?
Yeah, Time said some shit about how the Master is coming for you. The forces are coming.
Yeah.
And that's literal it is, you know?
To tell Yaz that the Master's coming back.
It's so infantilizing to Yaz. I hate it.
This touches upon something I'm thinking about that I'm increasingly realising, that we have 2 episodes left. One we know is about the Sea Devils and everything. Then we've still got this final episode that has to deal with whatever Master stuff, presumably also deal with the Fob Watch, unless that's never going to come back. Who knows? So Master, Fob Watch, Yaz, then some stuff that I'm not going to mention, but we've seen in sort of set images, spoilers.
Yes. Oh dear. Yeah.
Again, not going to bring that up because also I'm sure people have not everyone's seen it. However, from what it seems like, there's an awful lot that needs to be covered in this one episode, unless for some reason the Sea Devils episode ends up not really being about Sea Devils, which I doubt. So I'm concerned. So we already had a lot to deal with, plot wise. Now we've got Thasmin to deal with as well. So this comes back to our concern about whether or not Thasmin will be satisfyingly concluded. So we already have a lot of plot to get through that I'm worried will not get a satisfying conclusion. But we've also got an awful lot of emotional stuff potentially to get through that's not going to get a satisfying conclusion, and then also, we know it's going to culminate in the Doctor regenerating. So this is it, now or never, basically.
I think a very relevant point, and one that's going to get lost to time as well, is it wasn't always 3 specials either. The order was originally for 2 specials, and then another one was specially ordered later. So this idea of huge intentionality with the last 3 specials are going to tell a spanning story. Remember, one of them was ordered, much later than the others. It wasn't like there was always a grand plan of 6 the series 13 episodes and 3 specials. I have one thing left to say, but it will work best as the very ending. So anything anyone else wants to say now, go wild.
I thought the TARDIS was going to change. I thought we were going to get a new TARDIS for 1 episode.
They had a big dramatic reintroduction to, the TARDIS that has...
Yeah.
Actually, I did really like the visuals of it blowing apart. That was kind of cool. Where it started falling apart at the beginning.
It's so weird just within the structure of the show, it's so weird to repair it and have a little bit of an arc about it getting broken and then repairing it 2 episodes before it gets broken forever. Really odd. You could have just kept it broken.
Yeah, and made a big deal about it. They made a big deal about it and it was framed as a reveal just to show that it looked exactly the same.
Yeah, really odd.
You know what? Do you remember the late McCoy era TARDIS where the actual set was so screwed up they had to film it in really cool dim lighting? Wouldn't it have been cool to do that? If this TARDIS was a bit screwed up and always had sexy mood lighting, that could have been awesome for the last 2 specials. Wouldn't that look cool? If some of the pillars were permanently down.
And then you get a broken TARDIS Big Finish box set.
Yeah.
Geek, do you have any last thoughts?
Just one little thing. I think a funny pattern with Chib is that he likes to do fan service in the most disservice way possible. So not just Thasmin finally getting introduced only to have a disappointing ending, but stuff like, let's do the origins of UNIT. Oh, let's have it be this Great Serpent guy or whatever. Let's bring back Kate. Oh, she doesn't do anything. Chib just loves like anti-fan service in this way, just because he's so incompetent at doing the fan service that he seems to want to do. And it's just a funny observation, I think, and Thasmin fits into that.
I have a final quote that I think is really appropriate to close us out with. It's from Jodie Whittaker. It's from the very recently published Doctor Who magazine yearbook. And it is, Dan challenges us to speak truthfully about our feelings. For the Doctor, that's a big deal. She started to be honest within herself. Conversations will be had, and they will cost a lot. But everything is said with honesty and love.
Oh.
And that's it for our discussion on Eve of the Daleks. Thank you very much to all of you for coming on and having this chat with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's fun.
It was fun. Thank you very much to all listeners listening in. We really appreciate you guys, and whatever your opinions and interpretations of the episode, the era, our own shared perspectives on it, we hope you had an enjoyable experience listening to us as well. And as always, please comment away. I love seeing what commenters have to say and engaging with all that, so feel free to share what you thought of the episode itself, or our discussion on the episode, or both, or whatever else is on your mind. I love all of it. We have plenty more coming up on the channel this year. We'll soon have out a video I'm quite excited about, a video specifically on the topic of Thasmin, a deep dive into it, really honing in on the timeline of it, the progression of it through this whole era, doing a deep dive on Yaz's character and her relationship, one way or another, with the Doctor. We've got another Doctor Who debate coming up, one in which Chibnall's Dalek specials do play a part, and we've got loads else coming up besides, of course, covering the other Doctor Who specials out this year, and of course covering the upcoming non-Doctor Who TV shows of Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies. Stay tuned, we're not going anywhere, we've got plenty of stuff in the works for this year, and have a happy new year yourself, and thank you again for listening in.
Better written. Killer at home. Better written. Very cliched. Better written. Killer at home. Better written. Very cliched. But I still felt that story was fairly boring.
That's all this year is.
You don't even have to watch it in order.
Better written. Very cliched.